I came down off US 191 just after the heat drained out of the day, headlights taking the first slow curve toward Combe Ridge while the sky was stuck between orange and bruise-colored. If you know that country blanding down to bluff, you know how the land folds into itself. Long sandstone waves, cottonwoods pulled tight around the washes, and then that dark spine of rock running north-south like a mile-long animal sleeping with its back out of the ground. I wasn't there for sightseeing. I owed Ben a favor, and favors are a simple math I try to keep balanced. He helped me move out of Flagstaff when I couldn't afford a second trip, when the transmission was making sounds no one wanted to name. So I said yes when he asked if I could meet him near Butler Wash and help mark a fence line on an old permit he was trying to sort out for a rancher. I don't say this to be dramatic. I'm not built for it. But I grew up with certain stories in the background. My uncle worked construction near Kayenta in the late 80s and told me straight what not to do, where not to wander, and what words not to throw around. He didn't say those things with a grin. He said them like a man who'd made a mistake once and learned the shape of respect the hard way. You don't ask for details. You listen. I found Ben's truck at a cattle guard off a 2-track north of Bluff. He had the bed down and a stack of T-posts and a cooler sweating in the last of the afternoon heat. He was chewing sunflower seeds the way he did when he was focused, counting the posts left versus daylight, like he could spend both if he was careful. We shook hands. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. More winded in the shoulders, if that makes sense. The kind of tired that settles into bone. You came, he said. I didn't think you would. I said I would. I told you. I looked at the posts. What's the job? He pointed across the flats toward the first rise of Combe Ridge. Owner says the old line got stomped out by cattle. Wants fresh markers before a survey crew comes through next week. I've got tags and caps. We just need to walk it, find the old holes, and make it visible. Couple hours if we don't dawdle. The air had that clean mineral taste you get after a dry wind. Grasshoppers popping in the bunch grass. Crickets just starting their evening shift. We took packs and the first bundle of fiber flags and stepped off the 2-track where a few cattle had torn up the edges, following a faint memory of a fence line that had been something once. Regular gaps were where posts should have been. A rust stain in the dirt if you got down and looked. We walked a grid. I flagged. He set caps. The light got low, and the ridge turned into a cut of shadow against the dimming sky. That was when I noticed the prints. I call them prints because that's what they were. They weren't shoe tracks or deer sign. If you've walked enough country, you build a file cabinet in your head. Mule deer, elk, coyote, stray dog, someone's trail runner with a vibram pattern. This wasn't in my cabinet. It was a single line at first, like something stepping carefully, toes pointed forward. The front half was split like a hoof, but the back ended in a heel that looked almost human. Not in the theatrical way, not like someone pressed a Halloween prop in the sand. Just wrong. Like two ideas stuck together by something that didn't understand either one completely. I called Ben over without saying anything specific. He crouched, squinted, set his hand next to it for scale. He didn't touch it. Elk, he said, which was a joke. When I didn't laugh, he didn't either. They go anywhere? I asked. He stood and followed the line with his eyes. The prints angled parallel to the old fence cut, then crossed it at one of the spots where a post should have stood. We walked the direction they pointed. The ground turned from sand to a crusted patch and then to grass, and I lost them, then found one again in a softer pocket near a rabbit burrow. The front half, the cloven look, was deeper than the heel. Whatever made them put more weight forward. We went quiet. We didn't say it out loud, but our pace changed. We didn't linger at the post spots anymore. We moved with purpose that felt like something other than work ethic. You get much traffic out here? I asked to make a sound, to fill the space between us and the ridge. Once a month a ranch hand comes through. Tourists stick to the highway and Butler Wash pullouts. The owner doesn't like people wandering on these spurs. Why call you now? I asked. He nodded at the ridge. Owner's kid had a scare camping near a stock tank last week. Said coyotes kept circling. They sounded like people arguing. He paused, waiting for me to say something. When I didn't, he continued. Don't look at me like that. That's what he told the owner. They got spooked and left a mess, and now I'm the one who gets asked to clean it up and make the line obvious again. We worked until the last of the light burned flat against the horizon. Ben said there was a windmill tank a quarter mile to the east where we could crash. He had water and a camp stove and said it wasn't worth parking the truck closer just to spook whatever grazed out here at night. I agreed because the sky was already showing stars and I didn't want to walk back to the truck and drive a fresh set of tracks down into a place that didn't want them. The windmill was the old kind, with the tail fin riddled by 2 decades of holes from target practice. The head creaked once for every stray puff of wind. The tank was a dark plate, and the frogs were loud, a wall of sound that felt like privacy. We set our pads on the upwind side of the windbreak, built a small burner flame for coffee, and didn't talk much. I kept thinking about the prints. I kept thinking about the way they crossed that fence line, like they understood lines and didn't care about the rules. Those lines were supposed to enforce. First sign at camp wasn't much. Something moved the grass on the far side of the tank and made no sound doing it. No crickets stopped. No rabbit exploded out. Just grass bent in a smooth path like a hand pressed it down. Then the windmill tail clicked and swung and made the same sound twice in a row like something had knocked it. I told myself it was the wind. I tell myself simple stories until I can't anymore. We finished coffee and turned off the stove. No fire. I never do a fire when I'm sleeping light. Fires tell things where you are and how awake you are. They make you visible to whatever is comfortable in the dark. We lay back in our bags with our boots on and our headlamps around our necks, because I have learned not to waste time reaching in the dark. When I closed my eyes, the creak of the mill and the frog noise merged into a single sheet of sound. I drifted fast, and then woke hard without a dream in between. It was full dark. The stars were as bright as they get in that part of Utah, and I could make out the silhouette of the ridge behind the blacker line of cottonwoods along the wash. What woke me was my name. I'll write that plain. It was my name, said clean and wrong from the far side of the tank. Not a shout, not a whisper. It was my name in the voice of someone who had learned it by hearing it and wanted to try it on. If you've ever heard your own name from a stranger's mouth, someone who says it like a question when they're not sure they found the right person, that's what it was. It came once, then there was a pause, and then the frogs got too loud again, like the sound had scared them late. I kept still. I felt Ben's elbow nudge the edge of my pad. He was awake. He didn't sit up either. We waited. The name didn't come again. Instead, the windmill turned one slow notch and the tail flicked like something brushed it. I rolled my head and looked at Ben. He was already looking at me. His eyes were the only part that moved in the darkness. He mouthed, "You heard it." And I nodded. I eased my hand into my pack the way you do when you learn to move slow and keep your fingers working before your shoulders commit to motion. I found the headlamp, then the small flashlight I trust, then the folding knife I keep. Not because I believe it will solve anything, but because the act of having it matters. Weight in the hand is something to negotiate with fear. We didn't turn the lights on. We gave it time. I counted 30 breaths. There was nothing but frogs in the mill, and the frogs were too loud in the way noise gets loud to hide something else. I don't know what rule I broke by clearing my throat. But the moment I did, the frogs cut off like a switch. The silence had shape. A footstep in grass. Real. Measured. Another. The sound walked along the rim of the tank and stopped opposite us. I could see the water shiver in the starlight. That's how close it was. I said, "We're not lost," because that was the sentence that came to me. I've used it before when coyotes circle close. And when a stray dog thinks it can test a campsite. It tells a thing you are oriented. It tells a person you're not a mark. The stillness after was a held breath that didn't return to the chest it left from. Then it made a new mistake. It tried my name a second time, a little nearer, and got the vowel wrong. The wrongness is what scared me more than the boldness, like it was practicing, like it wanted to be better at it for later. Ben said, steady as I've ever heard him, "You should go." The water rippled toward us like something had leaned down to drink, then stopped without the sound of a tongue or a muzzle. The heel of my right hand started to sweat where it pressed on the ground. I know how coyotes move. I know their curiosity and their bluff. This wasn't a coyote. I'm not going to guess its shapes in the dark. But when a thing holds its breath with you and tries your name on twice, you don't have to see it to know you're past the normal edges of the map. We didn't turn our lights on. We lay there with our boots on and waited it out. The frogs began again in pieces. A breeze pushed the vanes and the mill creaked once, twice. You can believe what you like about what moved along the tank's far lip and then away into the grass. I heard steps go light like it didn't want the grass to talk for it. I heard them stop at the cottonwoods and then nothing, When the sky finally thinned toward dawn, I sat up and my back hurt like I'd been bracing for an hour. Ben sat up at the same time. Neither of us said good morning. We walked to the far side of the tank and looked for prints we wanted to find and didn't. Grass doesn't keep a diary. The only mark was a single place where something set weight near the tank's rim and dragged 2 fingernails across algae and iron. I say fingernails because that's what it looked like. 2 narrow tracks side by side, shallow, a few inches long and too clean for a hoof or a paw. We packed in 10 minutes. Coffee didn't come up. He said, "We'll finish the line and be done." I didn't argue. We walked farther east to stay away from the cottonwoods and curved back to the faint fence cut that led toward the ridge. We worked methodically because work gives your hands something to do while your head unknots itself. Half a mile on, the world decided to get smaller. Out in that open you see distances the way you see time. Nothing sneaks, but something had hung a strip of bright surveyor's tape on a mesquite ahead. Fresh and clean, snapping just enough to catch a corner of your eye. There hadn't been any tape on our way in the night before. I know because my mind had been filing waypoints, the way you do when you're deciding whether the truck is close enough to matter. This tape was new, or it had waited for light to show us. Ben walked to it. He didn't touch it. There were hoof marks under the bush, fresh. A small herd had moved through after the breeze picked up. That should have been ordinary. It wasn't because the tape hung at human eye level. And something about the knot was too neat. We followed where it pointed because that's what you do even when you shouldn't. You look at the thing someone meant you to look at because not looking feels like confessing fear. The flagged line let us off our fence cut by 20 yards, then 50. We were still inside of our own caps and tags, but farther than felt smart. The ground here was sandy again. The sort that prints want. We found them without trying. The same wrong hoof-heel shapes, deeper now. Like whatever made them had put weight down harder. The stride changed too. Longer for 3 steps, then short the next 2. Like a person trying on different ways to walk. "I'm done with this," Ben said. And that was the first time I heard the old tired edge in him. He bent to pull the tape free, but stopped halfway like something told him not to change the scene. "Leave it," I said. "Let's finish the post we can and go. You've got enough in to show the line. The survey crew can have the rest." He nodded. We backed out the way we came. Eyes on our own tags so we didn't drift. It's funny how small 40 yards feels when you've been called by name in the dark and then led aside by a bright strip of plastic in daylight. The ridge looked closer than before. The wash looked deeper. The land itself had changed its volume without moving. We didn't talk for the next hour. We set caps. We took bearings. We got it done. At the last post we planned to place, Ben stood and wiped his hands on his jeans and looked toward the truck, though it was too far to see. "We can make the road in 20 minutes, he said. "Let's not cut across the wash, stick to the flat." I agreed, and we turned back. The first thing I saw was a print set squarely over our boot tracks from the morning. Fresh, clean, the same wrong shape on top of ours like it had stepped where we'd stepped on purpose. It wasn't there when we walked out. It hadn't drifted in by wind. It was new. I looked at Ben to make a joke and felt the joke die in my throat. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was already scanning the open. Not frantic, just careful. I realized then he'd seen this before. Maybe not this exact shape, but this feeling. The feeling of a thing that knows where lines are and what names are and how far it is to your truck. The feeling of being studied by something that doesn't need to rush. We didn't run. We didn't even speed up enough to tell the story later like we'd panicked. We walked out steady, the sun clean on our necks. And every 100 feet I checked our back trail without turning my head, using the corner of my eye the way I was taught when I was young and wanted to see without giving away that I was looking. I didn't see movement. I didn't want to. And when the cattle guard finally showed and the silver of the truck mirror flashed between the sage, my shoulders dropped an inch on their own. That mile between the last post and the truck. That's where a person decides who they are. You can look back. You can pretend you're curious. Or you can admit what the ground already told you and get in the cab and go. We chose to go. We didn't slam the doors. We didn't crank the engine hard. We just put ourselves in steel and glass and rolled slow until the 2-track met the county road. When the tires touched asphalt, I let out a breath I'd been holding since the frogs cut off. I thought the day had decided its shape. I thought we'd leave it there, file it away in the cabinet where you keep the stories that don't help anyone to repeat. I thought that until we hit the first bend north and the voice that wasn't a voice came from just outside my window at 40 miles per hour and said my name a third time, closer, almost right, like practice was paying off. Hearing your name at highway speed does something simple to you. It strips off the ideas you have about noise and distance, and leaves only the fact that something kept pace with a moving truck long enough to speak and then vanished when you looked. I didn't jerk the wheel. I didn't brake. I kept the truck straight because the last thing I wanted was to give whatever was outside a reason to enjoy the wreck I handed it. Ben didn't ask if I heard it. He reached over and thumbed the window switch up as if glass mattered. The sound it made settling felt small. We didn't talk until the road bent again and the ridge slid behind a hill. The cab smelled like dust and the warm metal you get when the sun has been on a dashboard since morning. I watched the side mirror for shape and saw only sky and my own shoulder. We passed one of those county turnouts where graders sit sometimes, and I took it without announcing. Gravel knocked the undercarriage. I put the truck in park and left the engine running because engines are the one sound that keeps you honest out here. You kill it and you find out fast what else wants to be the loud thing. We should go into Blanding, I said. Get a room, come back in daylight and collect your posts, and walk up to the clerk and say what? He asked. We heard our names near Butler Wash and something paced the truck. You're not wrong. I just don't think putting 4 walls around it changes what it is. We could call the owner, I said. Tell him the line's flagged enough. Bill him and be done. We will, he said, but not tonight. I'm not driving the highway dark knowing whatever that is can touch us at 40. I didn't like his logic because it pulled us back toward the country we just left. But it made the kind of sense a body makes when it picks the thread it knows. We found another windmill visible from the road. A different one from last night's. The tank sat 50 yards off the shoulder. Cottonwoods spaced out like tired men at a long fence line. No houses in sight. No porch lights. We parked broadside to the tank so the cab faced it. I set the emergency brake and angled the headlights on low. I don't like bathing myself in light out of habit, but I dislike not seeing more. I set my lantern in the bed, lit it, and turned the valve until the mantles glowed. The truck's bed put it above knee height, light clearing the top of the grass and the tank lip. We stood on the roadside of the truck, doors open, the cab a fallback if the air turned wrong again. I thought about my uncle and the way he never told long stories, only rules. He said, don't whistle at night. He said, don't answer if a voice in the wrong place uses your name. He said, keep something iron on you, because men like to keep objects between themselves and fear. He never said iron mattered to anything else. He said it mattered to us. 10 minutes in, the crickets came in layers. Not the loud wall from last night. This was the sound a place makes when it's testing whether you belong. I kept my eyes on the strip of dirt between the tank and the grass. It's where anything coming out of the trees would have to cross if it wanted to reach water without showing itself early. What came first was a coyote. That wasn't a coyote because it didn't make a coyote's decisions. It came out on the far side of the tank. Head low, tail even lower. The way desert coyotes come when they've learned people won't share. It stepped into the lantern's edge and stopped. Normal coyotes keep moving, even if they circle. This one set its front feet, then placed each back foot directly where the front had been, not offset. I have seen careful dogs do that on hot pavement. I haven't seen a coyote do it like it was trying out a rule. It stood there a full 20 seconds looking fixed at the hood ornament like it had learned busy work to keep still. Don't move, I said, even though Ben hadn't moved. The animal turned its head slow toward the lantern, then toward us. The eyes didn't flash the way you get with a headlamp. They held the light steady like the animal understood glare and set itself at the right angle. Its ears didn't rotate. It let sound land on it. Then it opened its mouth and made a noise that started like a cough and ended like a man trying not to laugh. I won't dress that up. It made a bad version of a human sound and waited to see what we did. We did nothing. It closed its mouth and took 2 steps along the tank rim, almost slipping on the moss, then corrected mid-slide without water noise. Coyotes slip. This didn't. It moved like a plan correcting itself. It stopped again, aligned with our open doors. It was far enough we'd have to shout to change anything. I didn't shout. Don't say my name, I told myself in my head like a man rehearsing in a mirror. I didn't say Ben's either. Whatever was watching us had learned one word, and I wasn't offering it a second. The coyote shape lifted its nose and made a soft sound. I have only ever heard when a hunter's dog gets the scent on a path and tells the handler without barking. Then it did something that took the last choice out of this being boredom or a tall story I'm telling wrong. It set its right forefoot down in the dust inside the lantern's edge, and the print it left behind wasn't a round pad with claw marks. It was the wrong split and heel shape from our fence line right there on the smooth dirt where we could both see it. I felt the air get smaller. I'm not going to make this mystical. I mean the actual air you bring into your chest. I took a shorter breath to make the same rise. You should go, I said clearly and soft because I had nothing better. It turned its head left and opened its mouth in a way that read like a smile if you wanted it to read that way. And then it stepped back out of the ring of light and was not visible. And the night swallowed the spot like it had always been empty. We didn't chase shadows with the lantern. We held our ground. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. When the crickets came back, they did it in a normal way. I took that as good news, then reminded myself I had no measure for good. Let's button up and drive to Bluff, Ben said. His voice wasn't shaking. It had that small scrape in it that shows up when a person has spent too long in a tone they don't use often. He killed the lantern. I shut the doors and locked them without making a show of locking them. We buckled like we were leaving a job site. I put it in drive and rolled for the shoulder. A shape moved parallel to the truck on the cottonwood side. A clean pace just outside the cone of the low beams. I kept the speed slow, then faster, then slow again. The shape held the same window position like it wanted me to keep noticing it. When I sped up to 30, it angled away and vanished. I didn't wait for the voice. When it came anyway, I took it like weather. My name from the dark, closer to correct, still not right, dragged across the last vowel like rolling it around in a mouth that didn't have the right teeth. We hit 163, and took it east. I chose Bluff over Blanding because it was nearer, and because out here you sometimes pick the direction that points you toward a river. Rivers are lines in old country respects. The lights of town showed small and honest. Gas station, motel, a metal dinosaur out front of a rock shop. I pulled into the gravel lot behind the trading post because the main street felt too much like a place someone would expect us to choose if they knew we were trying to be around people. We sat with the engine idling and the doors locked and the radio off. The voice didn't come. Nothing paced the truck. I felt foolish to be in a town lot and still afraid. And then I decided embarrassment is a luxury. A man stepped out of a building with a paper cup and a work vest. He squinted into the lot and took 2 steps toward us, then stopped at the edge of the light like his boots weren't allowed to cross into the dark. He raised the cup a little like a hello and said, "You boys lost." Ben rolled his window down 2 inches. "You working late? Patching a bus pad before school starts tomorrow." He said, "You can park here. Just don't block the flatbed. You look wrung out," he said. "Coyotes," I said because it was easier to say and not completely false. He made a face that wasn't quite a smile. "Coyotes don't make you sit in a lit lot with the doors locked." I didn't answer. He took a sip and set the cup on the wall behind him, and kept his feet in the building's glow like someone had told him once, and he listened. "You hear anything answers to you by name. Don't answer back," he said without looking at us. That's what my grandma said. She wasn't the kind to talk just to fill up space. He didn't say the word I was keeping in my head, and I respected him for that. He picked up his cup again. "If you're leaving, leave. If you're staying, stay in the light. That's free advice. We'll head to the motel," I said. He nodded and didn't wish us a good night. He just watched us go until our headlights swung out on the street and touched the stop sign. We took a room with 2 beds and a carpet that had once been blue. I locked the door and set the chain and put my pack on the floor between my bed and the wall, like that meant something. The AC unit made a sound like a train a mile off and then settled. I kept the bathroom light on because there's a difference between fear and superstition, and I wasn't wasting attention on a black square the door couldn't fix. When I lay down, I thought rest would have to fight for a spot. It didn't. I fell into it hard and rose out of it just as fast at 2:13 a.m. because someone knocked on the motel door with my knuckles. Not just a copy of the rhythm a stranger would use. 3 soft, 1 after hotel style. It was the exact way I knock. It takes living with yourself a long time to hear something small and know it belongs to you. The knocks came again. Same timing. Same pressure behind the last tap like I do when I'm not sure anyone heard me. Ben sat up, eyes wide and empty. He didn't say my name. He didn't even whisper. We stared at the door. I made myself breathe quiet and slow because the body wants to start thrashing when it doesn't have work. The peephole was there if we wanted it. Neither of us stood to use it. The knock stopped. A full minute passed. The AC clicked. Someone outside the door tried my name through the seam near the latch in the wrong, almost right voice. Patient as a person who believes they live here. I waited it out and didn't gift it the sound back. After a while, the hall carpet made no sound, and I knew that meant it had learned more than my knock. It had learned something about the way I wait. We made it to morning. I say that flat because that's how it happened. Night ended. Light showed in the crack under the curtain. A delivery truck did its backup beeps across the street, and I let the sound all the way in like medicine. We showered and didn't talk about leaving the light on. We walked out to the truck and didn't find a mark on it that explained any of it. That's worse in its own way. Over coffee at the gas station, Ben opened the map app and put his finger along the spine of Combe Ridge. I have to pick up the posts, he said. They're the owners. I'm not eating that cost. We'll do it fast, I said. Highbench rode in and out. We headed back with the sun doing its normal honest job of making objects be what they are. It felt like cheating to use that as hope. I used it anyway. Before the spur where the bench narrows, the cab filled with that quiet pressure again. The feeling of being in a room that's too small for the air inside it. The radio tried to pick up a station and failed. The ridge gave us a full view of our flagged line below. Bright plastic squares where we'd left them. And then one of them moved. Not the tape. The cap on the last post lifted clean and set itself down 2 feet to the right without a hand to do it. I saw it because I was looking right at it. Ben saw it because he said flat, "There," and then didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything useful after that. We stopped because stopping had become our language. The truck idled. The caps didn't move again. The wind did nothing. The sun did what it always does. And then something tried the passenger door handle once, quick, like a friend running up late. The lock held. The handle returned to place. Nothing stood there. We took the spur off the bench because that was the job. The track dropped in loose shelves where rain had carried rock from the ridge. We stopped 50 yards from the last cap. Right away I saw our boot tracks from the day before. Overlaying them, same as before, were the wrong ones. Split up front, heel behind, placed on top of our steps like a lesson. We moved with the kind of care that looks like calm if you film it with no sound. I pulled the caps and coiled the tags, and Ben carried the bundle while I scanned the edges. At the second to last cap, a strip of new survey tape hung on a tamarisk branch we hadn't flagged. Bright, clean, tied with a neat square knot. It pointed toward the cottonwoods and the cool gap where the wash turned. "Leave it," Ben said. "We're not here for that." We finished stripping the line. I wanted to be wheels up already. But the tape did what bait does, even when you've decided not to bite. It made me feel watched for how I refused it. I squatted at the front bumper and looked for anything that could be pulled loose. That's when I saw a small pile of river stones stacked under the passenger door like a gift. 5 flat pieces, 3 in a base, 2 on top laid crosswise, each rubbed clean of dust like they'd been wet or handled with care. We hadn't parked here yesterday. Those stones weren't from our tires. They came from the wash, and they hadn't been there when we stepped out. I kicked the top 2 pieces off with the side of my boot. The sound was small. It bothered me that the action felt petty. "Enough," Ben said. "Up we go." We climbed in and closed the doors. I backed the truck around and started to climb the spur. We made 20 yards when the steering went slack for a beat like we'd run from dirt to ice. I eased off the throttle and the tires chewed air, then bit again. The yaw felt like a hand on the fender. We regained the crown with inches to spare. On the bench road we found another cairn. 5 stones. Same clean rub on the surfaces. Topped with a strip of bright tape tucked under the top rock so the tails ran down opposite sides like a marker in a book. The truck wasn't going around it without a scratch on the paint. We stepped out with the engine idling and the doors swung open. We took the stack apart piece by piece and laid it on the bench edge. I didn't like that it felt like we were cleaning up after someone who expected us to. Back in the cab I rolled forward, and my eyes caught a print at the base of a sandstone knob, half in dust, half on rock. The front was the split I'd already learned. The back, the human heel. And then behind that, 1 step back, the heel was gone, and a round pad with 4 small ovals for claws had started, like a change had happened mid-stride when the ground switched. The two shapes overlapped by a finger's width. I didn't point it out. I didn't need both our heads full of the same image. 200 yards from the cattle guard, we passed a rock art panel I'd never noticed. Figures. Humans, animals pecked in a lighter shade. Even from the driver's seat, I could see one thing that made my fingers go cold. A fresh pile of small stones stacked under the lowest figure, just like the cairns in our path, and a folded strip of bright tape set under the top piece like a tongue. "Keep going," Ben said flat. "Don't stop. Don't even slow down. Don't give it a chance to put you on your feet." I kept speed steady and let the cattle guard knock the tires and watched for any grab at the doors. Nothing tried us. The highway showed and ran straight north and south the way a promise runs. Plain, unambiguous. We made town and ate at the counter of the place that does burgers and green chili and pie. The waitress was the kind of person who knows when to leave a man and his food alone. "What now?" I asked, folding the bill into the check sleeve. "I call the owner and tell him the line is marked enough to find," Ben said. "And after that, we leave. We don't pick the ridge again. We don't test what it can or can't do 2 days in a row. We leave." It was the best plan on the table. We paid, stepped into the bright, and made for the motel to grab the gear we'd left. We were 20 minutes from pointing the hood at the San Juan, when the phone on Ben's dash lit with a call from the owner. "You get it done?" the owner asked by way of hello. "Enough to guide your crew," Ben said. "Caps and tags retrieved, lines visible where it matters." "You didn't leave caps on the last run?" the owner asked, confused. "My guy just drove out to check and said someone's been putting them back up since this morning. Says the last half mile looks freshly marked all the way to the wash." We looked at each other. Neither of us smiled. I pictured the bright plastic we'd pulled and coiled now standing up out there like we'd never touched them, pointing into the cottonwoods in a new neat line. "We didn't do that," Ben said. There was a short quiet on the line, and then the owner did what a practical man does when he hears something that doesn't fit. He ignored it. "Fine. Survey is out tomorrow," he said. "Send me your hours." "We're leaving town," Ben said. "We won't be around to answer questions." "Didn't ask you to be," the owner said and hung up. Already living in a different story than the one we were still inside. I put the truck in gear. We pulled onto 191 and headed for the bridge where the river cuts a green line through the red, and the highway makes a promise again. I told myself that leaving is a kind of respect too. I told myself that if a thing wants you to follow tape into cottonwoods, the strongest thing you can do is say no and make that no stick all the way to the county line. We held that resolve until the sun sat low and the ridgeline behind us went the color of old iron and the road shoulder began to show dust tracks that weren't ours, keeping pace just at the edge of view. That's how it started again. Quiet, patient, no tricks, just a pace beside us that didn't burn out. And somewhere between Bluff and Mexican Hat, where the highway goes lonely and the radio finds nothing to argue with, the window dark next to me leaned in with the shape of my name a fourth time, nearly right now, almost like a person I hadn't met had practiced it in front of a mirror. I didn't answer. I didn't look. We drove into the shadow of the next bluff, and came out the other side still moving. And that had to be enough for that mile of road. I saw Ben twice that first month and a handful of times after. First time was his yard returning a post driver he'd left in my truck bed and didn't want back anymore. He'd replaced it without saying that out loud. We drank coffee outside the shop, concrete warm from the morning. He said his daughter had started waking up asking if the dog needed to go out, and then she'd stand at the back slider with her hand on the glass like she was waiting for someone to knock from the yard. They don't have a dog. He fixed it by moving bedtime earlier and reading until she conked out heavy. Sometimes solutions are that small. Second time we met at a diner off the interstate. He looked better. I did too, if I'm honest. We talked about other jobs. We didn't go back south that season. There's a difference between avoiding a place because you're scared and choosing not to give a thing a second try at your expense. We chose the second thing, he said. You think it's tied to land or to us? I said. We left at places that weren't allowed to come home with me. That was enough answer for two men who already knew the rest. 3 weeks after, at my place, I found a small, neat stack of river stones on the back step. 4, not 5. And the top one had a piece of bright plastic pinched under it. Not survey tape, packaging ribbon from a misdelivered box, cut square. I didn't open the slider. I stood on the inside and looked for a long time. Then I called Ben and said, "It either came here or a person thought they were hilarious," he said. Either way, don't step out into the joke. I swept the stones into a dustpan from inside, with the long handle, and dumped them into the kitchen trash. I took the trash out at noon, not dusk. Nothing knocked that night, nothing since. You can say coincidence if that makes the world sit better for you. I won't argue. I'm not keeping a ledger to convince anybody. I know what I heard, what we saw, and what kept its voice just wrong enough to stand out. I also know we set terms near that fence line that held. We walked away on our own clock. We didn't give up names or steps we couldn't afford. In my math, that's a win. Here's the line I won't cross again. I won't answer if a voice in an empty place uses my name better the second time than the first. I won't follow tape I didn't tie, even if it's the same brand I use. I won't let someone I care about stand at a door after dark when a knock sounds like mine. I won't let a friend work that ridge alone. Not because men are weak alone, but because some parts of the map are just honest about what they ask from you. And the debt comes due faster if you don't split it. If you're looking for one neat ending, there isn't one. The survey got done. The owner paid. The posts stand straighter than they need to in a country that eats straight lines. The windmills still creak because wind does what it wants. Somewhere down there, a line of bright tape probably flutters in cottonwoods where there isn't a marked trail. I'm not going to check. That's not running. That's respect. When people ask, I don't tell this one at campfires. I keep the story here in a place where someone asked for the whole of it in straight words. If you wanted a lesson, I've only got the ones my uncle gave me and one we added on a dusty road at dawn. Don't answer when the wrong mouth uses your name. Don't follow what wants you under trees you didn't choose. And if a thing tests you with objects, set your own line and keep it without apology. That last one is the only part I'd call bravery. The rest is just living long enough to know which miles to drive past and which jobs to accept. And when a friend you owe says he needs a hand, make sure the hand you give him knows how to hold a door shut when the knock is perfect. The morning air bit at my exposed skin as I loaded my pack into the truck at the trailhead. October in Montana brings a particular kind of cold that seeps through your layers, but I'd grown accustomed to it after years of solo hiking. The parking area sat empty except for my vehicle, exactly as I'd hoped. Most hikers had already retreated for the season, leaving the trails to those of us who preferred solitude over comfort. I'd chosen this particular trail deliberately. While it couldn't match the grandeur of the official Glacier National Park viewpoints, it offered something those regulated paths couldn't: complete freedom. No permits, no rangers checking passes, no designated camping zones, just 8 miles of switchbacks climbing through lodgepole pines and Douglas firs to reach a modest overlook that few people knew existed. The first mile passed quickly as my boots found their rhythm on the packed dirt. Frost still clung to the shadows where sunlight hadn't yet reached, creating patches of white against the brown earth. My breath formed small clouds that dissipated instantly in the dry mountain air. The weight of my pack, tent, sleeping bag, food for 2 days, water purification tablets, emergency supplies settled familiar against my shoulders. By the 3rd mile, sweat had begun to soak through my base layer despite the temperature hovering around 40 degrees. The trail steepened considerably here, forcing me to lean forward and dig my trekking poles deeper into the ground with each step. Pine needles carpeted the path, muffling my footfalls and filling the air with their sharp, clean scent. I stopped at a small creek crossing to refill my water bottles, dropping in purification tablets and waiting the requisite 30 minutes. The water ran clear and fast over smooth stones, its sound the only noise besides my own breathing and the occasional call of a Clark's nutcracker somewhere in the canopy above. No other human voices, no distant laughter, no clicking of trekking poles against rock. Perfect isolation. The middle section of the trail proved the most challenging. Here the path wound through a series of false summits that played tricks on tired legs and optimistic minds. Each time I thought I'd reach the final push, another incline revealed itself beyond the crest. My quadriceps burned with the familiar ache of extended effort, and I had to stop more frequently to catch my breath in the thinning air. Around mile 5, I encountered the remains of an old forest fire. Blackened trunks stood like monuments to nature's destructive power, their bark still bearing the scorch marks from what must have been an intense blaze years ago. New growth had begun to reclaim the area, young aspens and lodgepole saplings pushing up through the ash-enriched soil. The contrast between death and renewal struck me as I picked my way through the skeleton forest. The temperature dropped noticeably as I gained elevation. I pulled on my fleece jacket during a water break, grateful for the extra warmth. My GPS showed 700-800 feet of elevation nearly there. The final 2 miles would be the longest, not because of distance but because of anticipation. That peculiar phenomenon where the closer you get to your destination, the more time seems to stretch. Wildlife signs became more frequent at this altitude. Fresh deer scat dotted the trail, and I noticed several trees with bark rubbed raw where elk had scraped their antlers. A set of tracks in a muddy section caught my attention. Mountain lion, probably a few days old based on how the edges had softened. I made more noise as I walked, calling out occasionally to announce my presence. The last thing I needed was to surprise a predator. Just before 5:30, exhausted but satisfied, I emerged from the tree line into the grassy meadow that marked the campsite. The opening stretched maybe 60 yards across, dotted with several fire rings built from locally gathered stones. Whoever had constructed them had done good work. The rocks fit together tightly, creating proper containment for campfires. I chose the ring closest to where the meadow dropped away to reveal the promised view. My tent went up quickly, muscle memory guiding my hands through the familiar process even as my mind wandered to thoughts of dinner. The bear canister came out next. Mandatory equipment even on unregulated trails if you had any sense about you. I hung it properly, 15 feet up and 4 feet from the trunk of a sturdy pine. With camp established, I prepared a simple meal of dehydrated pasta with dried vegetables, the water heating slowly on my portable stove. The altitude affected boiling time, turning what should have been a 10-minute process into nearly 20. I ate mechanically, more interested in calories than taste, saving half for breakfast. The overlook itself exceeded my modest expectations. A granite shelf extended out from the meadow, creating a natural viewing platform that jutted into empty space. The drop below was severe, maybe 300 feet straight down to a talus field of broken rocks. But the view, mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks catching the last golden light of day. Valleys filled with dark green forest created corridors between the ridges, and I could make out what might have been one of Glacier's famous peaks in the far distance. I settled onto a flat section of rock near the edge, but not close enough to trigger my vertigo. The sun hung low, painting the sky in gradients of orange and purple that no photograph could adequately capture. For 30 minutes I sat in complete stillness, watching the light show unfold across the Montana wilderness. The temperature plummeted as soon as the sun dipped behind the western peaks, and I could feel the rock beneath me beginning to radiate away its stored heat. Standing to return to camp, I turned and froze. A figure stood motionless in the undergrowth where the forest met the meadow, perhaps 40 feet away. In the rapidly fading light, I could make out only basic details: average height, dark clothing, no visible pack or camping gear. We locked eyes for what couldn't have been more than 2 seconds before he pivoted and disappeared into the trees. The encounter left me unsettled as I walked back to my campsite. His presence alone wasn't the issue. People hiked these trails after all. But the way he'd been standing there, watching, and then immediately leaving without a word or gesture of acknowledgement, that felt wrong. I scanned the meadow for signs of another tent or camp setup, but found nothing. The direction he'd taken led away from the established camping area, deeper into unmarked forest. I tried to rationalize it as I built my fire. Maybe he was a local who knew shortcuts I didn't. Maybe he'd been relieving himself and was embarrassed to be caught. Maybe he was just antisocial and preferred to camp away from designated areas. The explanations felt hollow even as I constructed them. The fire caught quickly. Dry pine kindling, crackling as flames consumed it. I fed it larger pieces gradually, building a sustainable burn that would last hours with minimal maintenance. My camping chair unfolded beside the ring, and I settled in with my water bottle and a worn paperback I'd brought but knew I wouldn't read. Hours dissolved into the darkness. I fed the fire periodically, watching sparks rise and disappear into the black sky above. The moon hadn't risen yet, making the darkness beyond my small circle of firelight absolute. My eyes had long since adjusted to the dim light, but I still couldn't penetrate more than a few feet into the surrounding forest. Around 11 o'clock, a sound pulled me from my fire-watching meditation. Footsteps, deliberate, measured, undeniably bipedal, moving through the forest in front of me. Not the chaotic crashing of a bear or the light stepping of a deer. These had the rhythm of human walking, The weight distribution of someone picking their way carefully through unfamiliar terrain in darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Someone there?" The footsteps paused. For a moment I thought whoever it was might respond, might step into the firelight and reveal themselves as just another hiker, maybe lost or looking for the campsite. But then they resumed. Same pace, same direction, circling around my position but never approaching. They continued for maybe 5 minutes before fading beyond my hearing. I stayed by the fire another hour, adding wood more frequently than necessary. The flames my only companion. My mind kept returning to the figure from earlier. No pack meant no camping gear. No camping gear meant he either had a base camp nearby, unlikely given the remote location, or he'd hiked up here for day use and gotten caught after dark. But that made even less sense. The nearest trailhead was 4 hours away on foot. Midnight passed, and sleep felt impossible. The combination of altitude, caffeine from my dinner coffee, and lingering unease from the evening's encounters had me wired. Rather than sit and stew in my thoughts, I decided to walk back to the overlook. The moon had finally risen, 3/4 full, and bright enough to navigate by without my headlamp. The granite shelf looked ethereal in the moonlight, its surface almost glowing against the dark void beyond. I could make out the silhouettes of distant peaks and the silver ribbon of what might have been a river far below in the valley. The night air had turned properly cold now, probably dipping into the 20s, and my breath came out in thick plumes. I stood there absorbing the scene when branches snapped behind me. Not the single crack of a stepping foot, but multiple breaks as if someone was forcing their way through the undergrowth without care for noise. I spun around to see the same man from earlier emerging from the tree line, but this time he didn't retreat. He moved with purpose, closing the distance between us with quick, aggressive strides. His face wore an expression that made my stomach clench. A wide, fixed smile that didn't reach his eyes, like a mask stretched too tight. He was talking, but not to me, not really. Words tumbled out in a stream of consciousness that made no sense. Fragments about the mountain, about waiting, about the moon being wrong, about counting days. "Hey, stay back," I said, raising my hands defensively. But he kept coming, kept talking over me with that horrible smile frozen on his face. When he got within 10 feet, I saw his body tense, saw his hands come up, and I understood with perfect clarity what was about to happen. He lunged forward, arms extended, aiming to catch me around the torso. The momentum would have carried us both over the edge if he'd connected solidly, but I'd seen it coming and managed to sidestep while bringing my arms up to deflect his. We collided anyway, his shoulder catching my ribs, but I had the advantage of preparation and slightly greater mass. I drove my knee up into his midsection and heard the air leave his lungs in a wheeze. His grip loosened enough for me to shove him backward. He stumbled but recovered quickly, that smile finally gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. He came at me again, this time trying to grab my jacket, my arms, anything he could use as leverage. His fingernails raked across my forearm, drawing blood through my fleece. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, using a simple defensive technique I'd learned years ago, forcing him to his knees. But he was beyond pain, beyond reason. He thrashed and pulled, making sounds that weren't quite words anymore. His free hand clawed at my leg, and I had to release him to maintain my balance. He scrambled to his feet and charged again, but this time I was ready. I stepped aside and used his momentum against him, sending him sprawling onto the granite. For a moment he lay there gasping, and I thought it might be over. Then he pushed himself up, slower now, that manic energy finally depleting. We stood facing each other, both breathing hard, blood from my arm dripping onto the rock. He looked at me, then at the cliff edge, then back at me. Without warning, he turned and ran, crashing through the brush the same way he'd come, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if he'd return. My hands shook as I struck camp, shoving gear into my pack without the usual care for organization. The tent stakes wouldn't come free from the frozen ground at first, and I had to work them back and forth, wasting precious minutes. Every sound from the forest made me freeze and listen, wondering if he was out there, watching, waiting for another opportunity. My headlamp illuminated a narrow cone of trail as I half ran, half stumbled down the mountain. The descent that should have taken 3 hours took 2, adrenaline overriding the protests from my knees and ankles. Twice I missed switchbacks in my haste and had to backtrack, costing me time and adding to my growing panic. The batteries in my headlamp died just as the trail leveled out near the valley floor. Rather than risk continuing blind, I found a cluster of boulders 20 feet off the trail and wedged myself between them. I wrapped my sleeping bag around me without setting up the tent, my knife open in my hand, and waited for dawn. Those 3 hours until sunrise stretched like days. Every forest sound became footsteps. Every shadow seemed to move. When the first gray light finally filtered through the trees, I packed up and completed the final 2 miles to the trailhead. My truck sat alone in the parking area, covered in frost but intact. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and filed a report. The ranger, a weathered woman named Sandra, took my statement with professional detachment, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She asked detailed questions about the man's appearance, his behavior, the exact location of the encounter. She had me mark it on a topographic map and took photos of the scratches on my arm. Over the following weeks, I heard various theories from people I told about the encounter. Some thought he might have been suffering from altitude sickness, which can cause confusion and aggression. Others suggested mental illness or drug use. A few proposed he might have been living rough in the mountains, territorial about what he considered his space. But I knew what I'd seen in his eyes during those final moments of our struggle. This wasn't confusion or territoriality, or even simple madness. It was calculation. He'd waited for me to be at the most vulnerable position possible, balanced on the edge of a cliff in the dark, and tried to kill me. Only preparation and luck had saved my life. I still hike solo, but never to that overlook again. And I always carry bear spray now, though it's not bears I'm worried about. Sometimes late at night I wonder if he's still out there waiting at other remote viewpoints, watching for solitary hikers to emerge from the tree line as darkness falls. The thought keeps me awake more than I'd like to admit. The summer of 2021 found me back at my parents' house, 23 years old and between jobs, filling the empty weeks with the kind of aimless comfort only childhood homes can provide. It was a Thursday morning when the idea struck me, camping in the woods behind the property. Nothing elaborate, nothing planned, just a single night under the stars in the forest I'd known since I could walk. I'd done this countless times growing up. Those woods were practically an extension of my bedroom, a place where I'd built forts, caught frogs, and learned the names of trees from my grandfather before he passed. The familiarity bred a certain carelessness in me, a confidence that would later seem dangerously naive. I told my mother I'd be spending the night out there. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle, just nodded and reminded me to bring enough water. My father was in the garage working on his truck, and I shouted the same information through the open door. He gave me a thumbs up, grease-stained and distracted. By 4 in the afternoon, I had my backpack loaded with essentials: tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, matches, and enough snacks to feed 3 people. I added my old camping chair, the one with the cup holder that never actually held cups properly, and headed out through the back gate. The property line technically ended about 50 yards into the tree line, but the woods themselves stretched for miles in every direction, dense, untamed, and completely without trails. This wasn't some manicured state park with markers and maintained paths. This was wild land, the kind that swallowed sound and light in equal measure. Growing up, my parents had always warned me not to go too deep, not because of any specific danger, but because getting lost out there was easier than anyone wanted to admit. I walked for about an hour, following the mental map I'd built over 2 decades of exploration. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and the air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. I found a clearing I'd used before, a natural break in the trees about 30 feet across, carpeted with soft grass and shielded from wind by the surrounding oaks and maples. Setting up camp took maybe 20 minutes. The tent went up smoothly. The campfire pit cleared without issue. I gathered dry wood from the surrounding area and got a small fire going just as the sun began its descent toward the treetops. The flames crackled and popped, sending tiny sparks spiraling up toward the darkening sky. This was exactly what I needed. The stress of job hunting, the awkwardness of living with my parents again as an adult, the general uncertainty of my early 20s, all of it seemed to dissolve in the smoke rising from my fire. I leaned back in my chair and watched the sun sink lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Everything was perfect. For about 30 minutes, The first hint that something was wrong came as a sound. A human voice, male somewhere in the trees. Not shouting, not calling out, muttering. The kind of low, continuous speech you might hear from someone talking to themselves or perhaps into a phone. Though the signal out here was non-existent, I straightened in my chair and listened. The voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once, bouncing off tree trunks and scattering through the undergrowth. The acoustic tricks of the forest made it impossible to determine the speaker's location. One moment it seemed to be coming from my left, the next from directly behind me. The shadows had grown long and deep. The sun had nearly touched the treetops, and the spaces between the trees had become dark pools where anything could hide. I squinted into the gloom, trying to spot movement, a shape, anything that would explain the sound. 5 minutes passed. The voice continued, sometimes louder, sometimes fading to barely a whisper. The words themselves were indistinct. I couldn't make out sentences or even individual words, just the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of someone's voice carrying through the evening air. These woods had no trails. No one hiked here. The nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away. For someone else to be out here would require either an extraordinary coincidence or deliberate purpose. I decided to make contact. Maybe it was just another camper. Someone as harmless as myself who'd stumbled into these woods for a quiet night. I stood from my chair and called out, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the forest. "Hello?" The word hadn't even finished leaving my mouth when the voice stopped. Not faded, not moved away. Stopped. Instantly, as if someone had pressed a button. The silence that followed was absolute. No voice, no birds, no rustle of wind through leaves. Just my own breathing, and the soft crackle of the fire behind me. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "Anyone there?" Nothing. The forest had gone completely still. I stood there for a long moment, straining my ears, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. The silence pressed against me like something physical, heavy and suffocating. Every nerve in my body was suddenly alert, that ancient part of the brain that recognizes when something is watching, even if you can't see it. 20 minutes of sunlight remained, maybe 30. The decision came quickly. I would move, find a new spot, set up fresh camp, and put distance between myself and whatever that had been. There was no point spending the night in a place that had already begun to feel wrong. I broke down my campsite faster than I'd ever done before. The tent came down in sections, stuffed haphazardly into my pack. The fire I kicked apart and smothered with dirt. Within 5 minutes I was shouldering my bag and walking deeper into the woods, away from the clearing that no longer felt safe. The light was failing rapidly now. What had been soft golden hour glow was becoming the gray murk of twilight, and I knew I didn't have long to find a new location. I walked quickly, not quite running but moving with purpose, scanning for any break in the trees that might serve as shelter. 15 minutes of searching yielded nothing ideal. No clearings, no natural campsites, just endless trees in every direction. Finally, with the last traces of light dissolving into darkness, I stopped. I was standing in a relatively open patch of forest floor, surrounded by tall oaks whose branches created a partial canopy overhead. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Setting up camp in near total darkness was a challenge. I worked mostly by feel. My flashlight clamped between my teeth as I struggled with tent poles and stakes. The fire took longer to start, the kindling damp from a recent rain I'd forgotten about. But eventually small flames caught and spread, and I had light again. I sat in my chair and stared into the fire, letting my heart rate slowly return to normal. The silence around me was still profound, but it felt different here, natural, peaceful. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe the voice had just been a hiker who'd gotten turned around, someone as startled by my presence as I'd been by theirs. The abrupt silence when I called out could have been surprise, embarrassment, anything. I reached into my snack bag and pulled out the supplies for s'mores. There's something almost meditative about roasting marshmallows over an open fire. The way you have to find the perfect distance from the flames. The patience required to achieve that golden brown exterior without burning. I stabbed a marshmallow onto a stick and held it over the fire, watching it slowly transform. Hours passed. I made several s'mores, ate some trail mix, drank water from my canteen. The fire burned down gradually, from a robust blaze to a comfortable glow. The night had become cold, and I found myself leaning closer to the remaining warmth, my chair positioned just a few feet from the embers. It must have been close to midnight when I decided to let the fire die completely. I was tired, ready for sleep, and the flames had diminished enough that maintaining them would require gathering more wood from the darkness. Better to just let nature take its course and retire to my tent. I was in the process of standing when I heard it. A crunch. Leaves compressed under weight. Behind me. To my left. I froze mid-motion. One hand on the arm of my chair. My body caught between sitting and standing. The sound had been distinct. Unmistakably a footstep. Not an animal's careful pad, but the heavy crunch of a human being making no effort to be quiet. I turned my head slowly, staring into the darkness behind my campsite. The firelight illuminated only a small circle around me, perhaps 10 feet in diameter. Beyond that, the forest was absolute black, impenetrable. Hello? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Thin and uncertain. Silence. Whatever had made the sound had stopped moving. Seconds stretched into minutes. I remained frozen, listening, waiting. My eyes began to play tricks on me, finding shapes in the darkness that probably weren't there. A branch became an arm. A shadow between trees became a watching face. I called out again, louder this time, trying to force confidence into my voice. I know you're there. What do you want? The response came not from the direction I'd been watching, but from somewhere to my right. A figure stepped into the edge of the firelight, materializing from the darkness as if born from it. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing dark clothing that seemed to absorb what little light reached him. His face was middle-aged, perhaps late 40s, with several days of stubble and deep-set eyes that caught the fire's glow in a way that made them look almost orange. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that had nothing warm behind it. Didn't mean to scare you, he said, his voice casual and friendly in a way that felt completely wrong. He walked toward the fire with the easy confidence of someone approaching their own campsite. Like he belonged here. Like I was the intruder. He sat down on a log near the flames and held his hands out toward the warmth, rubbing them together slowly. I stared at him, my mind racing. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was deeply wrong. But social conditioning kept me rooted in place, searching for a reasonable explanation. Can I help you? I managed. I think you're at the wrong campsite. He didn't look at me. His eyes remained fixed on the fire, and his face, which had been wearing that empty smile, slowly went flat, expressionless. No, he said. The word hung in the air between us. No explanation, no follow-up, just that single syllable delivered in a tone that had gone cold and dead. I waited for him to continue, to clarify, to say something that would make sense of this situation. He didn't. He just sat there, hands extended toward the dying fire, staring into the embers. The silence became unbearable. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, could feel sweat beginning to form on my palms despite the cold night air. Every second that passed without explanation only heightened the wrongness of the encounter. In desperation, I asked the first question that came to mind. Are you the one I heard earlier? Talking out in the trees near my other campsite? His face changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I caught it, a hardening around the eyes, a tension in the jaw. His smile was long gone now, replaced by something flat and unreadable. Must have been someone else, he said. His voice had changed too, dropping into a monotone that seemed stripped of all human warmth. The fire was dying. The light it provided was shrinking. The circle of visibility contracting around us. Beyond that diminishing boundary, the forest was a wall of absolute darkness, and I was becoming increasingly aware of how exposed I was, how vulnerable. I needed to leave. Every cell in my body was telling me to leave. But the man sat between me and my tent, between me and my gear. To get to any of my belongings, I would have to move toward him, not away. I was trying to calculate my options, to figure out what I could abandon and what I absolutely needed. When I heard it, a stick cracking, sharp and loud in the silent night. Behind me, to my back left, the same direction I'd heard the original footstep. My stomach dropped. The man at the fire wasn't alone. I turned my head just enough to glance over my shoulder, but the darkness revealed nothing. No shapes, no movement, just black emptiness that could have contained anything. When I turned back toward the fire, the man was no longer looking at the flames. He was looking at me. I don't remember the expression on his face. I don't remember if he was smiling or frowning or showing any emotion at all. What I remember, what has stayed with me through all the years since, were his eyes. They were empty in a way I'd never seen before. Not angry, not crazy, not even particularly threatening. Just empty. Like looking into the windows of a house where no one had lived for a very long time. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that I was in danger. Not the vague danger of an uncomfortable situation, but immediate physical danger. These men, whoever they were, had not stumbled upon my campsite by accident. They had followed me, they had waited, and now they had me surrounded. I didn't make a conscious decision to run. My body simply acted, powered by an instinct older than thought. One moment I was sitting in my chair. The next I was sprinting into the trees, leaves and branches whipping against my face and arms. Behind me, I heard the man's voice, sharp with frustration, saying something to his companion. The words were indistinct, lost in the rush of blood in my ears, and the crash of my own footsteps through the undergrowth. Then came the sound I'd been dreading. Footsteps behind me, heavy and fast, someone giving chase. The darkness was total. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. Couldn't tell if I was running into a tree or off a cliff until I was practically on top of it. Branches clawed at my clothing. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. I ran anyway, guided by nothing but instinct and the desperate need to put distance between myself and whatever was behind me. The footsteps followed. For how long, I couldn't say. It might have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. Time had ceased to function normally. I could hear whoever it was crashing through the brush behind me, close enough that I imagined I could feel their presence, their breath, their reaching hands just inches from my back. I knew these woods. That was my only advantage. I'd spent 20 years exploring every ridge and hollow, every creek and clearing. In my panic, that knowledge surfaced from somewhere deep in my memory, guiding me through the darkness like an internal compass. I dodged left around a massive fallen oak I couldn't see but knew was there. I jumped a small creek bed without slowing. I ducked under a low-hanging branch that would have clotheslined anyone who didn't know it existed. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Whether my pursuer had given up, gotten lost, or simply couldn't match my pace through terrain I knew, and they didn't, I couldn't tell. But the footsteps grew quieter, more distant, until finally I couldn't hear them at all. I didn't stop running. Not until I burst out of the tree line onto the gravel road that ran along the north edge of the property. I bent double, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, my entire body was soaked with sweat despite the cold night air. The road stretched in both directions, pale gray in the starlight. I knew which way led home. About 1.5 miles to the east. I started running again. My parents found me on the porch, covered in scratches and dirt, shaking so badly I could barely speak. My mother's crossword puzzle lay forgotten on the kitchen table. My father's truck sat in the driveway with its hood still up, his project abandoned mid-repair. They listened to my fragmentary explanation, exchanged a look I couldn't read, and my mother picked up the phone to call the police. The officers arrived within 20 minutes. They took my statement with the professional skepticism of people who had heard many stories, most of them exaggerated or imagined. I told them everything: the voice in the first campsite, the man who appeared at my fire, the second person in the darkness, the chase through the woods. They promised to investigate. They suggested I stay inside for the rest of the night. They asked if I'd been drinking or taking any substances. I hadn't, and I think they believed me, though their expressions remained carefully neutral. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light in the house burning, watching the darkness beyond the windows and waiting for dawn. My parents eventually went to bed, though I heard my father checking the locks twice before he retired. When morning came, I led a team of officers back to my campsite. We followed the path I'd taken, retracing my steps through woods that looked completely different in daylight. Benign, peaceful, the kind of forest that appeared on calendars and nature documentaries. The clearing where I'd set up my second camp was empty. Everything was gone. My tent, my chair, my backpack, my sleeping bag. Even the fire pit had been scattered, the stones rearranged to obscure the evidence of flames. The only sign that anyone had ever been there was a single tent stake I'd apparently missed, half buried in the soft earth. The officers searched the surrounding area. They found footprints, several sets in various sizes, but the leaf cover made tracking impossible. No identification was discovered, no abandoned equipment, no helpful evidence of any kind. They filed a report. They added extra patrols to the road near my parents' property. They told me to call if I remembered anything else, or if I saw either man again. I never did. That was 4 years ago. I've moved across the country since then, settled into a career, built a life that has nothing to do with those woods or that night. My parents still live in that house, still tend that property, but I've never walked past their back fence again. The forest that was once an extension of my childhood home has become something else entirely. A place I cannot enter, a darkness I cannot face. Some nights when I'm having trouble falling asleep, I find myself revisiting that evening in my mind. I analyze it like a puzzle, turning it over and over, looking for explanations that satisfy me. Robbery seems the most likely answer. 2 men working together, targeting isolated campers, stealing equipment and belongings. The fact that they took everything and left suggests they were there for my stuff, not for me. But if that's all it was, why the voice in the first location? Why the muttering that seemed designed to draw attention? The sudden silence when I called out. If they just wanted my gear, they could have waited until I fell asleep and taken it without confrontation. And why did the man sit at my fire like he owned the place? Why did he answer my questions with that strange, cold no, and that emotionless must have been someone else? Why did his eyes look so empty, so utterly devoid of humanity? I don't know what those men intended. I don't know if running saved my life or merely saved me a robbery. I don't know if I was minutes from serious harm or if I overreacted to a situation that would have resolved itself harmlessly. What I do know is this. My body understood something that night that my mind is still trying to process. Every instinct I possessed screamed danger, with a force I'd never experienced before or since. Whatever those men wanted, whatever their plan had been, my deepest self recognized it as a threat worth fleeing from. I've learned to trust that instinct. I've learned that the feeling of wrongness, that primal recognition that something is not as it should be, exists for a reason. Our ancestors survived because they listened to that voice, because they ran from the shapes in the darkness without waiting to confirm their fears. I listened, I ran, and I made it home. The woods behind my parents' house are still there, vast and unexplored, without trails or markers, stretching for miles in every direction. Sometimes, when I call my mother on weekend mornings, she mentions that she's heard voices out there. Hikers, probably, she says. Or hunters during season. Nothing to worry about. I don't argue with her. I don't tell her to be careful or suggest they move or let my fear become hers. What good would it do? But late at night, alone in my apartment 2,000 miles away, I sometimes think about those trees. I think about the darkness between them, the shadows that hide what we don't want to see. I think about a man's empty eyes reflecting firelight, and a voice that stopped the instant I acknowledged it, and I wonder, with a dread I've never quite been able to shake, whether they're still out there, waiting. I signed the paperwork in a windowless office in Carson City, Nevada, 3 months after my daughter's medical bills bankrupted me. The man across the desk, William, he said his name was, had kind eyes, but a voice that suggested he'd seen things that would make most people quit sleeping. "You understand this position requires discretion," William said, sliding the final form across the metal desk. "Your family will be told you work in forestry management. The pay is triple what you'd make anywhere else. But the work," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "the work is difficult. I'd been a park ranger before the bills started piling up. Before my ex-wife's lawyers bled me dry and Sarah's leukemia treatments consumed everything I'd saved. I knew forests, knew survival, knew how to track and how to read the land. Those skills apparently were exactly what this unnamed government division needed. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not really. You'll work with a team, William continued. Former military, mostly. Good men. You'll receive 2 weeks of training at our facility in Michigan. Then you'll be deployed as needed. Oregon, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, wherever people go missing in the deep woods. Missing persons work? Of a sort. William's expression darkened. The cases we handle, they're the ones that don't make sense. The ones where search and rescue finds things that shouldn't exist. Where experienced hunters vanish without a trace, leaving behind evidence that contradicts everything we understand about nature and human behavior. I should have walked away. Any sensible person would have, but I was 3 months behind on rent. Sarah needed another round of treatment, and I'd spent too many nights staring at credit card statements that might as well have been death sentences. When do I start? The training facility sat deep in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to swallow sound. Our instructor was a man named James, compact, scarred, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen combat up close. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You're here because you can navigate wilderness," James said on our first morning, addressing the 12 of us assembled in the briefing room. "But the wilderness you'll be entering isn't like anything you've encountered. We're not tracking lost hikers or investigating animal attacks. We're hunting things that hunt us." A man to my left, Aiden, according to his name tag, raised his hand. "Things? You mean animals?" "I mean things," James repeated. "Every culture has folklore about the wilderness. The Native Americans have the Wendigo and skinwalkers. European settlers brought stories of the wild hunt and black dogs. Russian immigrants whispered about the Leshy. These aren't just stories, they're warnings, passed down because our ancestors encountered something out there that defied explanation." I caught the eye of Hunter, a broad-shouldered man with a Tennessee drawl who'd been bunking next to me. He looked as skeptical as I felt. James pulled down a screen, projecting a map covered in red pins. "These are disappearances in the last decade that fit our profile. Experienced outdoorsmen vanishing in clear weather. Bodies found in impossible locations. 30 feet up in trees, buried in ground too hard to dig, positioned in ways that suggest ritual. Survivors who return with no memory of their time missing, or memories so fractured they stop making sense." He clicked to the next slide. Crime scene photos. A campsite torn apart with a violence that seemed almost purposeful. Trees marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. And footprints, dozens of them, circling the site but never entering. "You'll work in teams of 4 to 6, James continued. "Each team has a tracker, a medic, a communication specialist, and shooters. You'll be given equipment that most people don't believe exists. And you'll follow protocols that will seem insane until they save your life." Over the next 2 weeks, we learned those protocols. Never investigate alone. Never follow lights in the forest after dark. Never respond to voices calling your name. Never turn your back on a tree line. Never, under any circumstances, acknowledge that you've seen something impossible. Doing so, James insisted, made you visible to things that should remain unaware of you. We trained with weapons I'd never seen before. Modified shotguns loaded with shells containing salt and silver. Rifles with specialized rounds and close-quarters weapons that seemed more suited to medieval warfare than modern tactical operations. We learned first aid for injuries that shouldn't exist. We practiced radio communications with code words designed to convey terror-level threats without saying them aloud. And every night, James would share another story. Another team lost. Another mission that went wrong. Another reminder that we were preparing to face something that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with, and often couldn't be stopped, only survived. On our last night, I found James smoking behind the barracks, staring into the dark tree line. "You ever think about quitting?" I asked. He took a long drag before answering. "Every day. Been doing this for 8 years. Lost count of how many team members I've watched disappear." He turned to look at me, and in the dim light I could see how much older he looked than his file claimed. "But someone has to do this work. Someone has to stand between the people who go camping with their families and the things that would love nothing more than to add them to their collection." "Collection? You'll understand soon enough." He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you get your assignment. And tomorrow, the real education begins." I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We sat in the barracks, 12 men who'd signed away our normal lives for paychecks that would save our families, and wondered what exactly we'd agreed to hunt. At dawn, William returned with our assignments. I was placed on Team 3 with Hunter, a medic named John, and a communications specialist called Mason. Our first deployment would be in 6 hours, North Carolina, William said, handing me a file. 3 hikers went missing on the Appalachian Trail 2 days ago. Local search and rescue found their campsite. I'll let you read the report, but he hesitated. The symbols around their camp match patterns we've seen before. Patterns that suggest something very old has taken an interest in that stretch of trail. I opened the file, read the first page, felt my blood go cold. The footprints circling the camp weren't human, but they weren't animal either. They were something in between, Something that walked on two legs but left marks in the earth, that suggested a weight and gait that shouldn't exist in nature, and carved into every tree around the abandoned camp, precisely 1 meter above the ground, was the same symbol. A spiral of 7 branches, each ending in what looked disturbingly like a human handprint. "Gear up," Williams said quietly, "and remember your training. Whatever you see out there, whatever calls to you in the dark, it's not what it appears to be. Trust only your team. Trust only what you can verify. And if you hear someone calling your name in the woods, never answer." I finished. He nodded grimly. "Good luck." 6 hours later, I was on a plane heading east, watching the sun set over landscapes that suddenly seemed far less empty than they had before. The Cherokee National Forest smelled of pine sap and decay. We arrived at the command post, a converted ranger station, just after midnight, where a local coordinator named Logan briefed us on the situation.
3 hikers, Logan said, spreading photos across the table. Robert Henshaw, age 34, experienced mountaineer. Charles Greaves, 42, Eagle Scout leader. And Thomas Greaves, Charles's son, 19 years old. They radioed in 2 nights ago to confirm they'd made camp near Rowan High Knob. When they didn't check in the next morning, we sent a search team.
He pulled up photos on his laptop. The campsite looked like it had been carefully disassembled rather than attacked. Tent poles removed and stacked with precision. Sleeping bags folded. Backpacks arranged in a perfect circle around the cold fire pit. "No signs of struggle?" Hunter asked. "None. But look at this." Logan zoomed in on the ground around the camp. The spiral symbols, dozens of them pressed into the soft earth. And the footprints. God, those footprints. They circled the camp in a pattern that suggested patience, observation, something taking its time to study the humans before acting. "The tracks lead north," Logan continued, "deep into the wilderness. Our regular search and rescue won't go beyond the established trails." He paused, and I understood the unspoken words. "They won't go because they know better." "What's north?" I asked. Logan pulled up a topographical map. Old-growth forest. Some of the oldest trees on the East Coast. There's been incidents in that area before. Hikers reporting strange singing at night. Campers finding their supplies moved while they slept. And disappearances, going back decades. The Cherokee have stories about that area. They call it the place where trees watch. Mason, our communications specialist, set up the radio equipment. "I'm getting interference," he said, adjusting frequencies. "Lot of atmospheric distortion for a clear night." "It's not atmospheric," Logan said quietly. "It happens every time someone goes missing up there. Radio, cell, satellite, all of it gets unreliable." James appeared in the doorway, carrying equipment packs. Behind him stood 3 more men. Edward, our backup tracker, Caleb, a shooter, and George, who handled the specialized equipment we'd trained with. "We move at first light," James said. 2 teams. Team 3 takes point with me. Team 2, he nodded at Edward's group, follows at 100 meters. We stay in radio contact. We follow the tracks, and we stick to protocols. I spent the night checking my gear. The modified shotgun felt heavier than I remembered. The shells rock salt mixed with silver, and something else James had called sanctified earth rattled in their bandolier. I had a combat knife, a GPS tracker that James had modified with symbols etched into the casing, and a small mirror on a lanyard around my neck. "Why the mirror?" I'd asked during training. "Because some things can't hide their true nature in a reflection," James had answered. "And because knowing what you're really looking at might give you the split second you need to survive." At 5 a.m., we assembled at the trailhead. The forest seemed to absorb our flashlight beams, creating more darkness than it dispelled. James led, following the tracks with a precision that spoke to decades of experience. Hunter walked beside me, his rifle held ready. John stayed in the middle, carrying the medical pack. Mason brought up the rear, radio in hand, constantly monitoring for any transmission. The tracks were impossible. They'd been made by something walking upright, but the stride length varied wildly, sometimes normal human steps, sometimes covering 3 meters in a single bound. And they pressed deep into the earth, suggesting a weight far beyond what the size of the prints should indicate. "They're fresh," James said after we'd walked for an hour. "Less than 12 hours old." They. Hunter caught the plural. "Multiple entities," James confirmed. "At least 3, maybe more. They're staying together, moving as a unit." Why concerning? Because usually they hunt alone. If they're grouping, it means they're confident. It means they're not worried about being challenged. We walked deeper into the forest. The trees here were massive, ancient hemlocks and oaks that must have been growing since before European settlers arrived. Their canopy was so thick that even in daylight the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight. Around noon we found the first marker. It was a tree branch broken and arranged to point north. But the break pattern was wrong. Snapped with a force that should have shattered the wood, yet somehow leaving the break smooth, almost deliberate. Warning, James said, or invitation. Hard to tell which. What's the difference? I asked. Warning means they want us to leave. Invitation means they want us to follow. Either way, we proceed carefully. We found 3 more markers over the next hour, each pointing us deeper into the forest. The temperature dropped despite it being June. Our breath misted, and the sounds changed. The normal forest noises fading away, replaced by a silence so complete it felt oppressive. Radio check, Mason said quietly. Team 2 respond. Static, pure white static. Team 2, this is Team 3, respond. More static. Then faintly through the interference, a voice. Can't see them anymore. Something in the trees. The transmission cut off. James raised his fist, signaling us to stop. We formed a defensive circle, weapons raised, scanning the tree line. The forest seemed to press in around us, the shadows between the trees taking on shapes that shouldn't exist. Team 2, Mason tried again. Report your position. Silence. Then, impossibly clear despite the static that had plagued every transmission, a voice responded. But it wasn't Edward's voice. It was young, terrified, unmistakably Thomas Greaves. Help us. Please. We're at the old chapel. They're keeping us at the old chapel. Please, God, someone help us. The transmission ended with a sound that might have been static or might have been screaming. James checked his GPS. There's no chapel on any map. Maybe it's old, John suggested. Abandoned building. Not on current maps? Or maybe it's bait, Hunter said. What we were all thinking. James looked at each of us in turn. Protocol says we report back. Wait for additional units. But those hikers might still be alive. We have maybe 6 hours of daylight left. Decision point. Do we pull back or push forward? I thought about Sarah, about why I'd taken this job. About 3 men who'd gone into these woods expecting a normal camping trip and found something that defied explanation. Forward, I said. The others nodded agreement. All right, James said. But we go weapons hot. And at the first sign of serious trouble, we extract. No heroics. We're no good to those hikers if we're dead. We moved deeper into the forest. Following coordinates Mason had triangulated from the transmission. The tracks we'd been following veered away, as if whatever made them had deliberately led us away from where the hikers were being held. The trees grew closer together. The underbrush thickened, and everywhere carved into bark and pressed into earth, those spiral symbols. Hundreds of them, thousands. Like something had spent years marking its territory, claiming this place as its own. Then Hunter grabbed my arm, pointed up. In the branches above us, barely visible in the dim light, were shapes. Human-sized, but wrong. They clung to the trees like insects, motionless, watching us with eyes that reflected our flashlights like animals. Don't acknowledge them, James whispered. Don't look directly at them. Keep moving. We did. But I could feel those eyes following us, tracking our every movement. And I counted at least 7 of the shapes, all moving silently through the canopy, pacing us. After another 30 minutes, we emerged into a clearing, and there, impossibly, stood a chapel. It was old, colonial era, maybe earlier, built from local stone and ancient timber. The roof had partially collapsed, but the structure remained standing, and around it, arranged in concentric circles, were the personal belongings of dozens of people. Backpacks, hiking boots, cameras, all laid out with religious precision. Jesus Christ, John breathed. Count the circles, James said, his voice tight. I counted. 7 circles, 7 spirals. And at the center, the chapel door stood open, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow light. From inside came singing, human voices, harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize. And one of those voices belonged to Thomas Greaves. We'd found them. But something told me we'd only found what they wanted us to find. James checked his watch. 3 hours until dark. We need to be out of here before then. And if we can't, Mason asked. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. We'd all heard the stories about what happened to teams caught in the deep woods after sunset. All right, James said, chambering around. Standard rescue formation. We go in fast, we grab them, and we run. No stopping, no investigating. This is a snatch and grab. We approached the chapel door. The singing continued, wordless and haunting, and from the trees around us, the watchers descended, taking positions on the ground, forming their own circle around the clearing. They wanted us to go inside. That much was clear, which meant that whatever was waiting in that darkness was exactly what they wanted us to meet. James took a breath, gripped his shotgun tighter, and stepped through the doorway. We followed, and the singing stopped. The interior of the chapel was larger than it should have been. That was the first impossible thing I noticed. The space inside defied the dimensions of the exterior structure. The second thing was the cold, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the presence of something fundamentally wrong. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating walls covered in the same spiral symbols we'd been seeing. But here they were painted in something dark that I didn't want to examine too closely. And beneath each spiral was a name, carved into the stone with painstaking precision. These go back centuries, Hunter whispered, running his light along the wall. Look at the dates, 1823, 1847, 1891. They're recording them, John said, his voice shaking. Every person who's gone missing here, they're keeping track. At the far end of the chapel, standing in front of an altar that had been carved directly from the bedrock, were 3 figures. Robert, Charles, and Thomas Greaves. They stood perfectly still, eyes open but unseeing, their lips moving in silent speech. Contact, James said into his radio. We have the missing hikers. Condition unknown. Preparing for extraction. Static answered him. But through the static came laughter. Not human laughter, but something that approximated it, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. We approached the hikers carefully. I reached out to touch Robert's shoulder, and he didn't respond. His skin was ice cold. His eyes tracked past me, focused on something I couldn't see. Robert, I said firmly. Robert Henshaw, can you hear me? His lips stopped moving. Slowly, with mechanical precision, his head turned to face me. When he spoke, his voice wasn't his own. It was layered, multiple voices speaking in unison. Some of them clearly female, some clearly children. The Watchers have seen you, the voices said through Robert's mouth. The Watchers have counted you. The Watchers have welcomed you to the collection. Snap them out of it, James ordered. Physical contact, cold water, whatever it takes. John moved forward with smelling salts, but before he could reach Charles, the man's head snapped around with a crack that suggested broken vertebrae. He smiled, and his mouth was full of teeth that hadn't been there before. Too many teeth, too sharp, arranged in rows like a shark. You shouldn't have come, Charles said in that same multi-layered voice. The agreement was made. The tribute was offered. These 3 belong to the forest now. What agreement? James demanded. Shotgun raised. The old agreement. The first agreement. When your kind pushed too far into the wild places, when you cut the ancient trees and built your roads and claimed dominion over land that was never yours to claim. The Watchers were here first. The Watchers will be here last. And the Watchers must feed. Thomas suddenly convulsed, his body arching backward at an angle that should have broken his spine. When he straightened, something looked out through his eyes. Something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. 1 in 7, it said. That was the agreement. 1 in 7 who enter the deep woods belongs to us. We mark them with our signs. We sing them our songs. We bring them home. And in exchange, we let the others pass unmolested. But you, Thomas's finger pointed at each of us in turn. You are not tribute. You are trespassers in a sacred place. You are hunters who have wandered into the den of greater predators. Fall back, James ordered. Slow and steady. Maintain visual contact. We began backing toward the door, but it had sealed itself, or never existed in the first place. Where the entrance should have been was only solid stone. There is no leaving, the thing wearing Thomas said. Not until the Watchers decide. You wanted to find the missing? Look around you. They're all here. They've always been here. We keep them safe. We keep them singing. We add their voices to the chorus of the forest. The chapel walls began to shift. What I'd thought were shadows were actually alcoves, and in each alcove stood a figure. Some were recent. I recognized a woman from the missing persons photos we'd studied during training, but others were old, so old their clothes had rotted away, their skin mummified against bones that shouldn't still stand upright, and they were all singing, mouths moving in perfect synchronization, voices rising and falling in that alien harmony we'd heard from outside, a chorus of the lost. "This is how it's always been," Robert said. "This is how it must always be. The forest takes what it needs. The forest gives back what it chooses, and the watchers ensure the balance is maintained." Mason was frantically working his radio, trying every frequency. "Team 2, this is Team 3. We are trapped in the structure. Need immediate extraction." "Team 2 is singing now," Charles said with that terrible smile. "They heard the songs. They followed the signs. They're adding their voices to the chorus. Would you like to hear them?" The singing changed. 3 new voices joining the harmony. I recognized Edward's baritone, Caleb's rough tenor. George's voice had always been soft, but here it carried clearly, twining with the others in a melody that made my head ache and my vision blur. "No," James said firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not playing this game." He raised his shotgun and fired directly at the altar. The blessed ammunition exploded against the stone, and for a moment the chapel itself seemed to scream. The figures in the alcoves convulsed. The 3 hikers dropped to the ground, gasping, and somewhere in the darkness above us, something massive moved, shaking dust from the rafters. "Again," James shouted. "Everyone, light it up." We fired in unison. Salt and silver and sanctified earth tore through the air, striking the walls, the altar, the symbols painted in blood. Where the ammunition hit, the stone itself seemed to bleed, dark ichor running down the walls like tears. The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard something else. Footsteps on the ceiling. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The watchers were coming. "The door," Hunter shouted. And I turned to see that our attacks had broken whatever held the entrance sealed. Daylight poured through the opening, painful and brilliant after the darkness of the chapel. "Move." James grabbed Thomas, hauling the teenager to his feet. John and I seized Robert and Charles. They were dead weight, completely unresponsive, but they were breathing. That had to count for something. We ran. Behind us, something dropped from the rafters. A massive shape that moved like a spider but sounded like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Our flashlights caught glimpses. Too many limbs, too many joints. A face that was a collection of faces, all of them human, all of them stolen from the people who disappeared into these woods. Hunter fired behind us as we fled, buying us seconds. The chapel entrance seemed miles away despite being only yards distant. I could feel the presence at our backs, vast and hungry, reaching for us with appendages that existed in too many dimensions. We burst through the doorway into afternoon light that felt like salvation. The moment we crossed the threshold, the chapel simply stopped. The presence that had been pursuing us halted at the doorway, unable or unwilling to follow. "Keep moving," James ordered. "It's still daylight, but that won't last forever." We dragged the 3 hikers into the clearing, laying them on the ground. John immediately began checking their vitals while Mason tried desperately to reach someone, anyone, on the radio. Behind us, filling the chapel doorway, was something that hurt to perceive directly. It was tall, impossibly tall, and it wore the forest itself like a cloak, branches and moss and bones woven into something approximating human form. Where its face should have been was that spiral symbol, 7 branches extending outward, each ending in a human hand. "You have taken what was promised," it said, and its voice was every missing person speaking at once. "You have broken the agreement. The forest will remember. The watchers will remember. And when you return to your homes, when you walk through ordinary woods, when you find yourself alone under the trees, the watchers will be there, waiting, watching, collecting." "We're not coming back," James said, shotgun still aimed at the thing in the doorway. "And we're taking these men with us." "You will return," it said with certainty. "All who serve in the deep places return eventually. The forest calls its children home. And you, James Morrison, have been walking these woods for so long. Don't you hear it? Don't you feel the pull? You've been marked, just like the others. You belong to us now." James's face went white. Mason grabbed his arm. Sir, we need to move. Now. The thing in the doorway tilted its head. A gesture that sent shivers down my spine because it was so human, so familiar, attached to something so fundamentally alien. 7 years, James, it said. That's how long you've carried our mark. 1 in 7. That was the agreement. And you've served for 7 years. Your time is ending. Your voice will join the chorus soon. Fall back, James said quietly. Everyone fall back. Now. We lifted the hikers and retreated into the forest, moving as fast as we could while carrying dead weight. Behind us, the figures that had been watching from the trees descended into the clearing, approaching the chapel in a processional that looked almost reverent. Don't look back, James said. Whatever you do, don't look back. But I did. I couldn't help myself. And I saw them, dozens of figures, hundreds maybe, all converging on that impossible structure. And I understood that this wasn't just a chapel. It was a home, a nest, a place where something ancient had made its dwelling, collecting lost souls like a child collects butterflies, pinning them to the walls and making them sing. We ran until the forest opened up, until we found the trail we'd arrived on. The GPS that had been useless in the deep woods suddenly locked onto satellites again. Mason's radio crackled to life with normal static, normal interference. Command, this is Team 3. Mason gasped into the radio. We have the missing hikers. We need immediate medical evacuation and... He paused, looking at James. And we've lost Team 2. I repeat, Team 2 is MIA. The voice that responded was Williams. Copy that, Team 3. We have your position. Evac is inbound. And James, a long pause. We need to talk when you get back. We waited at the trailhead as the sun set behind the mountains. The 3 hikers began to stir, confused and disoriented but alive. They remembered nothing after making camp. No watchers, no chapel, no singing. Just darkness, and then waking up with us. A helicopter appeared over the tree line just as the last light faded from the sky. As we loaded the hikers aboard, I looked back at the forest one final time. Between the trees, barely visible in the twilight, stood figures. 7 of them. They didn't move, didn't gesture. They just watched as we lifted off, their eyes reflecting the helicopter's lights like animals. And I realized with cold certainty that the thing in the chapel had been telling the truth. We'd broken something today, made enemies of something that had been content to operate within rules we didn't understand. And now those rules no longer applied. The forest would remember. The watchers would remember. And 1 in 7 of us belonged to them now. I just didn't know which one. The debriefing lasted 3 days. We sat in the same windowless office where I'd signed my contract, going over every detail of what we'd seen in the Cherokee National Forest. William listened with the expression of someone hearing a diagnosis they'd been dreading, taking notes in a leather journal that looked older than he was. The agreement, he said on the second day, after we described the thing in the chapel doorway. That's the first time we've heard them acknowledge it explicitly. You knew about it? I asked, too exhausted to be diplomatic. You knew there was some kind of deal and you sent us in there anyway. William set down his pen. We suspected. There have been patterns in the disappearances, statistical anomalies that suggested something beyond random chance. Roughly 1 in 7 groups that enter certain wilderness areas don't come back. Not all of them, just one person. Sometimes 2 if the group is large enough. The math was too precise to be coincidence. And Team 2? Hunter's voice was hard. Edward, Caleb, George, were they part of the statistics? We're still searching, William said, which wasn't an answer at all. But I'd seen the truth in the chapel. I'd heard their voices added to that terrible chorus. They weren't coming back. Not in any way that mattered. On the 3rd day, William called James in alone. Through the thin walls, I could hear raised voices, though not the words. When James emerged an hour later, he looked 10 years older. They're putting me on desk duty, he said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Medical discharge. Compromised in the field is the official term. Because of what it said, I asked. About the mark. About 7 years. James nodded slowly. They did a full medical workup. Found something in my blood work, proteins that shouldn't exist, forming structures that look like those spiral symbols on a cellular level. Apparently I've been changing, slowly, ever since my first deployment. Whatever it was in that chapel, it marked me 7 years ago, and I've been becoming something else ever since. Can they stop it? They don't know. This is all new territory. They're going to try various treatments, but he exhaled smoke, watching it dissipate into the Nevada afternoon. I can feel it sometimes now, like something calling from a great distance. A voice in the back of my head singing. It's getting louder. We were given 2 weeks off. Hunter went home to Tennessee. John returned to his family in California. Mason flew to Seattle. I drove back to Carson City, to the apartment I barely remembered, and spent the first week sleeping 14 hours a day, trying to convince my nervous system that I was safe, that nothing was watching me from the shadows. Sarah called on the 6th day. My daughter's voice was stronger than I'd heard it in months. "The treatment's working, Dad," she said, and I could hear the smile. "The doctors are optimistic. They think I might be in remission by Christmas." "That's great, baby," I said, meaning it. This job, this terrible job, was at least accomplishing what I'd signed up for. "When can you come visit?" "I miss you. Soon," I promised. "I just have to finish up a few things with work." After we hung up, I stood on my apartment balcony, looking at the desert mountains in the distance, and tried to figure out if I could actually go through with this. If I could keep doing this job, keep walking into forests where things that shouldn't exist waited to add me to their collection. The answer should have been no. Any rational person would quit, take their chances with bankruptcy, find another way. But I thought about James, about how he'd spent 7 years in the field before the forest came to collect him. I thought about Team 2, probably still standing in that chapel, adding their voices to the eternal chorus. I thought about the 3 hikers we'd saved, who'd gone home to their families with no memory of how close they'd come to becoming part of something ancient and hungry. Someone had to do this work. Someone had to stand between the ordinary world and the things that waited in the deep places. I went back to work. The next mission came 2 weeks later. Pennsylvania this time, the Allegheny National Forest. 2 hunters had gone missing. Their truck found abandoned at a trailhead with their rifles still locked inside. The team was different now. James was gone, replaced by a man named Ryder, who had 8 years of experience but lacked James's instincts. Team 2 had been officially disbanded, though William assured us a new Team 2 was being assembled. For now, it was just us. Me, Hunter, John, Mason, Ryder, and 2 new faces. Colton, a tracker from Montana, and Jackson, who handled communications when Mason needed backup. "Different forest, same patterns," Ryder said during the briefing. "Spiral symbols carved into trees, circular tracks around the last known location. And this," he pulled up a photo that made my breath catch. It was a trail camera image, time-stamped 2 days ago. It showed a figure standing at the edge of the frame, mostly obscured by shadows. But what was visible was enough. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent at angles that didn't match human anatomy. And where its face should have been, that spiral symbol, 7 branches clear, even in the low-resolution image. "The watchers are getting bolder," William said, showing themselves to cameras, leaving more obvious signs. "It's like they're not afraid of being discovered anymore, or they want to be discovered," Hunter suggested. "After what happened in North Carolina, maybe they're sending a message."
What kind of message?
That the agreement is over, that the 1-in-7 ratio doesn't apply anymore, that they're done playing by rules. The thought sat heavy in the room. If Hunter was right, if the balance that had existed for centuries was breaking down, then every wilderness area in the country could become a killing ground. "We proceed as planned," William said. "Standard search and rescue protocols. You find the hunters, you extract them, you get out. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Do not attempt to communicate. And for God's sake, do not enter any structures that shouldn't exist." We flew to Pennsylvania that night. The Allegheny was beautiful in late June. Rolling green hills covered in oak and maple. Rivers that sang over ancient stones. It looked nothing like the Cherokee forest. But the moment we entered the trailhead, I felt it, that same oppressive silence. That same sense of being observed by something vast and patient. "The tracks lead northeast," Colton said, studying the ground. 2 sets, both male, both heavy, probably carrying gear. They walked out of their truck voluntarily, which suggests they weren't fleeing from anything. "Or they were lured," I said, remembering how Thomas's voice had called to us from the chapel. We followed the trail for 6 hours, moving through increasingly dense forest. The spiral symbols appeared with growing frequency, carved into bark with such precision that they looked machine-made. And everywhere birdsong and animal sounds were absent, replaced by that terrible silence that preceded the presence of the watchers. At dusk, we found the first hunter. His name was Logan Pierce, according to his driver's license. He was hanging from a tree, 30 feet up, positioned in a way that suggested he'd been carefully placed rather than thrown. His eyes were open, but he wasn't quite dead. His chest rose and fell slowly, and his lips moved in silent speech. "Get him down," Ryder ordered. Colton scaled the tree with practiced ease, cutting the ropes that held Logan in place. We lowered him carefully, and John immediately began checking his vitals. "He's hypothermic," John reported. "Barely responsive. Been up there at least 12 hours, maybe more." "Logan," I said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Logan, can you hear me? Where's your friend? Where's the other hunter?" His eyes focused on me slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was his own. Weak and terrified, but definitely his. "Colton," he whispered. "Colton. They took Colton." My blood went cold. "What did you say?" "My friend. Colton Marsh. They took him to the circle. They're waiting there," they said. "They said they'd trade. One of us for one of you. That's the new agreement. One marked for one unmarked. Balance must be maintained." Ryder grabbed my arm. "Your tracker's name is Colton." I turned to look at where Colton had been standing a moment ago. The space was empty. He was simply gone. "Lights," Hunter shouted, and we all activated our flashlights, sweeping the forest around us. Nothing. No sign of struggle. No footprints. No trace. Mason's radio crackled. Through the static came a voice. Colton's voice, calm and slightly confused. "Team 3, this is Colton. I found the second hunter. I'm about 200 meters northeast of your position. I think we should check it out, but I'm hearing some weird singing, and the transmission cut off with a sound that wasn't quite static, and wasn't quite screaming." "That's bait," Ryder said. "Obviously bait." "Obviously," I agreed. "But what choice do we have?" In the distance, just audible over the wind in the trees, came singing. Human voices, harmonizing in that alien language we'd heard in the Cherokee forest. But this time there were only two voices, Colton's baritone and a tenor I didn't recognize. "They work fast," Jackson said, his face pale. "We had a choice to make. Save Logan, who was right here, or try to rescue Colton, who was already adding his voice to the chorus." The rational decision was clear, but we weren't being paid to make rational decisions. "We go get him," I said. "All of us together. We don't split up. We don't separate. And if this is a trap, it's definitely a trap," Hunter interjected. "Then we spring it together and fight our way out." Ryder looked at each of us, then nodded. "All right. But we take Logan with us. I'm not leaving him here alone. John, can he be moved? He needs a hospital, but we can carry him if we have to." We rigged a makeshift stretcher from branches and our ponchos, loaded Logan onto it, and moved northeast, following the sound of singing. The forest seemed to close in around us, trees leaning inward, branches reaching down like grasping fingers. After 15 minutes, we found the circle. It wasn't a chapel this time. It was simpler, more primitive. A clearing ringed by standing stones that looked like they'd been there for millennia. And in the center, bound to two of those stones with rope that looked like it was made from human hair, were Colton and the second hunter. They were both alive, both conscious, both singing. Around the circle stood the watchers. I counted 7 of them, their 2 tall forms barely visible in the twilight. They didn't move as we approached, didn't acknowledge our presence. They just watched. "This is wrong," Hunter said quietly. "It's too easy. They're just letting us walk up." He was right. There should have been resistance, threats, some kind of challenge. Instead, the watchers simply stood in their circle, observing. Then I saw it. On the ground between us and the prisoners, carved into the earth with devastating clarity, was a line, a boundary. And on our side of the line, pressed into the soil with precise spacing, were 7 sets of footprints, one for each of us. It's a trade, I realized. They're offering a literal trade. Colton and the hunter for 7 of us. 1-to-1 exchange. "That's insane," Jackson said. We can't." But one of the watchers moved, and suddenly it was right in front of me, close enough that I could see the details of its form. It was wearing the forest. Yes, but beneath the moss and bark and bone was something else. Something that might have been human once, thousands of years ago, before the transformation took hold. When it spoke, its voice was old beyond comprehension. The marked one understood. It said, 7 years, 7 marked, 7 owed. The agreement changes, but balance must always be maintained. You broke the old bargain when you took what was promised. Now new terms must be set. What new terms? Ryder demanded. 7 for 7. You have 7 marked among you. Not all in this clearing, but 7 nonetheless, who carry our sign in their blood. They belong to the forest now, have always belonged, will always belong. Give them to us, and the rest of your kind may pass unmolested. Refuse, and the harvesting begins. 1 in 7 becomes 2 in 7, then 3, then 4. The ratio shifts until balance is restored. I understood then, the mark James carried. That proteins that had been changing him on a cellular level, we all had it now. Everyone who'd been in that chapel in North Carolina, everyone who'd heard the singing and escaped. We were infected, transformed, slowly becoming something that belonged to the Watchers rather than to humanity. How long? I asked. How long until the change is complete? 7 years, it said, unless you choose to accelerate it. Step across the line. Release your friends. Join the chorus willingly. Your transformation will be instant, and painless, and eternal. You will sing in the deep places forever, and you will never feel fear or pain or loss again. It was tempting. God help me. It was actually tempting. To stop fighting. To stop being afraid. To simply let go and become part of something vast and ancient and permanent. No, Ryder said firmly. Absolutely not. We're not trading ourselves for them. Then they sing, the Watcher said. And in 7 years you will join them. It stepped back across the line, returning to its position in the circle. The other Watchers took up the song, their voices blending with Colton's and the Hunters, creating a harmony that made my skull ache and my vision blur. We need to fall back, Ryder said. Regroup. Come back with more firepower. They'll be gone by then, I interrupted. You know they will be. We extract them now or we never do. With what plan? You want to charge across that line and hope for the best? I thought about Sarah, about why I'd taken this job, about all the people who'd disappeared into the woods over the centuries, adding their voices to the chorus, about James, sitting in some facility somewhere, feeling the change creep through his cells. Then I remembered something from training, something James had said during one of his late-night stories. The mirror, I said, pulling the small mirror from around my neck. James said some things can't hide their true nature in reflection. What if that works both ways? What if it reveals not just what they are, but what we are? What good does that do us? Jackson asked. The mark, it's in our blood, changing us from the inside. But we're not changed yet. We're still human. Still us. Maybe if we can show that, prove it, the trade won't work. They can't take what hasn't finished transforming. It was a long shot. A desperate theory based on folklore and training that felt like it belonged in a different century. But it was all we had. Do it, Hunter said. We've got nothing to lose at this point. I crossed the line. The moment my foot touched the other side, the singing stopped. Every Watcher turned to face me, and I could feel their attention like physical weight, pressing down, examining, measuring. I'm marked, I said, holding up the mirror so it caught the last light of day. I know I am, but I'm not yours yet. Look, I held the mirror up to my face, and in its surface I saw myself. Tired, scared, absolutely human. No spiral symbols, no transformation, no sign of what I was slowly becoming. Just a man from Nevada who'd taken a job to save his daughter. The Watchers stirred. One by one they approached the line, looking into the mirror, and in its reflection I saw them too. Not as forest spirits or ancient entities, but as what they'd once been. Humans. Men and women who'd walked into the woods and never come back. Who'd been transformed so slowly they didn't realize what they were becoming until it was too late. You're like us, I said softly. You were marked too, generations ago. You thought you were joining something holy, something eternal. But you were just the next generation of prisoners. We are the Watchers, one of them said. But its voice sounded uncertain now. We are eternal. We are the forest. You're victims, I said. Just like James will be in 7 years. Just like I'll be if I don't find a way to stop this. You're still human enough to remember what it was like before the transformation. Human enough to know this is wrong. The Watchers looked at each other. For a moment I thought I saw confusion in their movements, doubt in their terrible forms. Then one of them, the tallest, the one that seemed oldest, stepped forward and spoke with absolute certainty. "We remember," it said. "We remember being human. We remember the fear, the pain, the desperate hope that someone would save us. We remember all of it." It reached out with one too long arm and touched the line drawn in the earth. The boundary began to smoke, to burn, to break apart. "And we remember that no one came," it finished. "No one saved us. No one broke the agreement. We sang alone until we forgot our names, our faces, our lives before the forest. Why should your fate be any different?" The line shattered, the boundary collapsed, and the watchers rushed forward. We ran. We didn't make it 50 feet before they surrounded us. 7 watchers moving through the forest like smoke, appearing from behind trees that had been empty a moment before, dropping from branches that couldn't support their weight. They didn't attack, didn't grab us, they just herded us, driving us deeper into the Allegheny like wolves cutting prey from a herd. Logan had stopped breathing. John tried CPR while we carried him, but his body had grown cold, his lips frozen in the shape of words we couldn't hear. The singing had claimed him before we'd even tried to cross the line. "Northwest," Mason gasped, checking his GPS. "They're driving us northwest, away from the trailhead, away from any roads." "Toward what?" Ryder demanded. I knew the answer before Mason said it. "There's a geographical anomaly about 2 miles ahead. Depression in the landscape that shouldn't exist according to geological surveys. The maps label it as a sinkhole, but it's another one," Hunter finished. "Another nest. Another place where they keep the collected." The forest opened into a ravine so deep the bottom disappeared into shadow. Along the walls, carved into living rock, were alcoves. Hundreds of them, thousands, and in each alcove stood a figure, perfectly preserved, lips moving in silent song. This wasn't a chapel or a circle of stones. This was a cathedral, the mother nest, the place where the Watchers had been collecting the lost for longer than recorded history. "Oh God," John whispered. "How many people? How long has this been happening?" At the bottom of the ravine, barely visible in the twilight, stood a structure that hurt to perceive directly. It wasn't built. It had grown, like a tree, but wrong. A massive spiral of bone and wood and stone that twisted up from the earth. Each curve lined with alcoves, each alcove holding another prisoner of the forest. And at the base of the spiral, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 empty spaces, waiting. "The final harvest," said the tallest watcher, appearing beside us without sound or warning. 7 marked souls to complete the cycle. 7 new voices to strengthen the song. 7 sacrifices to renew the agreement and restore the balance. "What balance?" I demanded. "You keep talking about balance, but all I see is murder. Abduction. Centuries of taking people who just wanted to enjoy nature, to walk in the woods, to trespass," the watcher interrupted. "To claim, to build and burn and destroy. For every tree cut, a voice must sing. For every mountain carved, a soul must serve. For every river dammed, a life must be collected. This is the balance. This is how the wild places survive in a world that seeks to tame them." The other watchers began descending into the ravine, their movements eerily synchronized. They weren't individuals anymore, I realized. They were part of something larger. A hive mind, a collective consciousness that wore human forms like masks. "We're not going down there," Ryder said, raising his rifle. "Everyone, weapons ready. We're fighting our way out." "Fight if you wish," the watcher said. "But you cannot kill what is already claimed by the forest. Your bullets will pass through us like rain through trees. Your blessed ammunition will sting, yes, but it will not stop us. Nothing stops the harvest once the marked ones are identified." It was right. I'd seen James's shotgun tear apart the chapel, but the thing inside had barely noticed. These entities weren't physical in a way that mattered. They were forest-given form, ancient will made manifest. You might as well try to shoot fog. But then I remembered something else from training. James's voice, tired and certain. "When you can't fight the thing itself, you fight what sustains it." The song. The eternal chorus rising from the ravine. That's what kept them here. What gave them form and purpose. The voices of the collected, singing in harmony, maintaining the spell that transformed humans into watchers. If we could disrupt the song. "Mason," I said urgently, "your radio, can you broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously?"
Rare, but I'd blow out the speakers and probably... Why?
Do it. Maximum volume, white noise, static, anything to drown out the singing. He understood immediately. Sonic disruption. If the song maintains their cohesion. He yanked the radio from his pack, starting to fiddle with the controls. I can give you maybe 30 seconds before the equipment burns out. Make it count, Ryder said, positioning himself between Mason and the watchers. Everyone else, the moment the song breaks, we run. Don't look back, don't stop, don't engage. We get to the vehicles and we get the hell out of Pennsylvania. The watchers were close now, reaching out with those two long arms, ready to drag us down into the ravine. I could see Colton in one of the alcoves halfway down the spiral, his mouth moving in perfect time with all the others. He was already lost, already part of the collective. Now, I shouted. Mason triggered the broadcast. The forest exploded with sound. Pure white noise at volumes that should have been impossible from such a small device, amplified somehow by the ravine itself, echoing and building until it drowned out everything. The singing, the wind, even the sound of our own heartbeats. The watchers froze. Their forms began to shimmer, to lose coherence. The collective consciousness that bound them together fractured, and for a moment, they were individuals again, confused, frightened, remembering what it was to be alone inside their own heads. In that moment of disruption, we ran. The ravine wall was steep but climbable. Hunter went first, finding handholds in the rock. John followed, then Jackson. Ryder provided covering fire, not at the watchers who were reforming as the radio began to fail, but at the alcoves themselves, trying to disrupt as many of the singers as possible. I was halfway up the wall when I heard Mason scream. I looked back and saw him being dragged toward the spiral, 3 watchers pulling him down into the darkness. His radio had finally died, the speakers blown, the plastic casing melted from the heat of overuse, and without the disruption the song returned. Louder now, angry, demanding. "Keep climbing," Mason shouted up at us. "Don't stop, don't!" His voice cut off as he was pulled into one of the empty alcoves. I saw his lips begin to move, syncing with all the others, adding his voice to the eternal chorus. "No." Jackson started climbing back down, but Hunter grabbed his arm. "He's gone. You can't help him. We don't leave people behind." "Look at him." Hunter pointed at Mason, who was already transforming, his skin taking on a gray-green tint, his limbs elongating. "That's not him anymore. That's what we'll become if we don't move now." We climbed, hand over hand, finding purchase in cracks that seemed to appear just when we needed them, as if the forest itself was uncertain whether to help or hinder our escape. Behind us, the watchers began ascending, moving up the walls like spiders, but slowly, as if they weren't quite real in 3-dimensional space. We crested the ravine edge just as full darkness fell. In the twilight, the forest seemed less solid, more like a suggestion of trees and shadows. We ran blindly, following John's GPS, praying we were heading toward the trailhead and not deeper into the woods. 20 minutes later, gasping and bleeding from dozens of scratches, we burst onto a dirt road. Our vehicles sat exactly where we'd left them, bathed in moonlight, absolutely ordinary. We didn't speak as we drove away, didn't process what we'd seen, what we'd lost. We just put miles between ourselves and the Allegheny, driving through the night until we reached a gas station in a town that felt almost offensively normal. Ryder called William from a payphone, speaking in code that boiled down to, "Mission failed. Multiple casualties. Recommend complete avoidance of target zone." We drove back to the facility in Nevada in shifts, none of us able to sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. Every shadow looked like a watcher. Every wind sound might be singing. The debriefing lasted a week this time. William listened to our report with the expression of someone watching a terminal patient's condition deteriorate. When we finished, he sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. "I'm shutting down the program," he said finally. "Not just this unit, the entire division. We've lost 37 operatives in the last 8 years. The disappearance rate is accelerating. And now we know why. We're not fighting random supernatural entities. We're fighting the forest itself, and it's fighting back in ways we never anticipated." "What about the people already marked?" I asked. "James, me, Hunter, John, Jackson, all of us from the Cherokee Forest? We'll monitor you, try to find treatments, but honestly, we don't know if there's a cure. The transformation is cellular. Gradual. Seemingly irreversible. He pulled out a folder, handing me a photograph. This was taken at James's facility yesterday. The photo showed James in a hospital bed, but his skin had started to change, taking on that gray-green tint we'd seen on Mason. And on his arms, visible even in the low-quality image, were spiral symbols, not tattoos or scars, but growths, his own skin arranging itself into the patterns of the Watchers. How long does he have? Hunter asked quietly. Weeks, maybe months. He's fighting it. But William shook his head. The change is inevitable. Eventually he'll walk into the woods and he won't come back. They all do. And us? You have time. Years, maybe. We'll work on treatments. Try to slow the progression. But the truth is, once you're marked, once you've heard the songs and seen the collectors, you're part of their world now. You belong to the forest, whether you want to or not. We were discharged with full benefits and NDAs so comprehensive that breaking them would result in federal prosecution. The government didn't want this story getting out. Didn't want people knowing that there were places in America, hundreds of places where ancient things waited to collect the unwary. I went back to Carson City, back to my apartment and my daughter and my normal life. The medical bills were paid. Sarah was in remission. Everything I'd wanted when I took this job had come true, but I could feel it. In quiet moments when I was alone, I could hear singing, faint and distant, like a radio station just out of range. And sometimes when I looked in mirrors, I saw shadows behind my reflection, tall figures with too many joints, watching and waiting. 3 months later, Hunter called me. We hadn't spoken since the debriefing. I heard it last night, he said without preamble. In my backyard, the song, clear as day, like they were standing right behind me. But when I turned around, nothing was there. Me too, I admitted. It's getting louder, every night, a little clearer. The doctors say I have maybe 5 years before the change accelerates. They're trying treatments, but nothing's working. The proteins keep replicating. The patterns keep forming. He paused. I think James is gone. His facility stopped answering my calls last week. We both knew what that meant. James had heard the call and answered it. He'd walked into the woods and joined the chorus, just like the Watchers said he would. Are we going to fight this? Hunter asked. Or are we going to accept that in 5 years, maybe sooner, we'll be standing in alcoves somewhere, singing for eternity? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. That was 6 months ago. I still live in Nevada, still see Sarah when she visits from college, still try to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But the singing grows louder every night. And when I sleep, I dream of forests I've never visited, of ravines that spiral down into darkness, of alcoves waiting to be filled. Last week I found myself standing at the edge of a national forest, 60 miles from home. I don't remember driving there. I don't remember making the decision. But there I was, at sunrise, looking into the trees, feeling that terrible pull. I turned around, drove home, but I know I'll go back. Eventually we all go back. The forest remembers. The Watchers remember. And now I understand what they meant about balance. For every person who walks out of the woods, something walks back in. For every life saved, a life must be collected. The agreement wasn't broken in that North Carolina chapel. It was renewed. Written in blood and cellular transformation, binding those of us who dared to interfere with something ancient and patient. 1 in 7, they said. But they were wrong. 7 in 7. All of us who were there that day, all of us who heard the songs and survived, are marked. In 5 years, maybe less. There will be 7 new Watchers standing guard over 7 new nests, and the cycle will continue, as it has for millennia. I write this as a warning. If you're reading it, if you're thinking about taking a job with a government division that deals in missing persons in wilderness areas, if someone offers you money to track things that shouldn't exist, walk away. The pay isn't worth it. The adventure isn't worth it. No amount of money is worth joining the eternal chorus, worth spending forever as a guardian of places humans were never meant to settle. The forest will survive without you. The Watchers don't need new recruits. And the balance they talk about, it's not a balance, it's a harvest. And we're all just crops waiting to be collected. I can hear them singing now. Right now as I write this final paragraph. They're outside my window, though when I look there's nothing there. Just darkness and the rustle of wind through trees that don't exist in Carson City. But they will exist. Soon, When I can no longer resist the call, I'll drive east. I'll find the forest. I'll walk until I find the nest that's been waiting for me since the moment I signed that contract. And I'll take my place in the alcove with my name already carved above it. 7 branches in a spiral. 7 voices in harmony. 1 and 7 becomes 7 and 7 becomes 70 and 7. The mathematics of the forest are simple and infinite. And the song never ends. It never ends.